There's a level of anxiety that comes with starting a new job that I just hate. Not sure if it's just the process of learning what to do, the pressure of proving myself to new coworkers, or just the stress of being in a new environment. But it's been a constant across every job I've ever taken. This newest one piled that anxiety onto the max though, and I don't think I'll be going back after what happened last night. To be perfectly clear, if I end up hitting send on this and you're reading it right now, well, it's not really up to me if I go back to work or not. They're probably going to ship me off to some black site that's further off the map than my current position. 1 week here and I've learned all those conspiracy theories that Americans have about Area 51 barely begin to scratch the surface, so I might as well go for broke and tell the whole story, right? I've been in the Air Force for about 5 years now, and this was supposed to be my latest post. Something that my commanding officers said was a breeze, which I honestly had doubts about considering I'd been in Germany for the last 2 years and it was, for lack of a better description, the easiest stuff that I've ever done. They said it would be just as easy, except I would get to be back on home turf in the desert of Nevada. Guard duty isn't that hard anyway, right? Assuming that you're guarding humans. My first day started out like any other that I've had. Get to the base, find the CO there, and get my orders directly from them. They assigned me to this older officer as my trainer, Mills, and he started leading me through the main building towards our post. According to him, all we had to do was keep an eye on the security cameras for the entire place and notify higher-ups if anything looked out of place. The base itself was, well, what you would expect from a base in the middle of the desert. A few big, nondescript buildings surrounded by fences with a healthy amount of razor wire. I honestly wasn't expecting much when I got in, but imagine my surprise when Mills told me to hop into a golf cart so that we could get to the monitor room. I mean, I always figured there was more to Area 51 than what we could see from the outside, but when we drove at least 4 miles through this huge tunnel on a pretty steep incline, he was talking to me the whole time, asking me if I had found a place to live nearby yet, and telling me about staying away from the Vegas Strip on my days off. It seemed like we were driving for hours though, my stomach getting more and more uneasy with every passing foot, when we finally stopped in front of a small door built into the side of the tunnel. Hey, you're lucky, kid. This has to be the cushiest job in the entire US military. We just watch these screens and give a little check-in every other hour. Sometimes they'll have us do rounds and check out doors. Otherwise, I just sit here and work on my Sudoku puzzles for as long as I want while getting top dollar for it, he said to me when we entered. The room was surprisingly big, with almost the 2 entire walls filled floor to ceiling with monitors that we were supposed to keep track of. Some showed empty gray rooms with nothing but abandoned desks. Others were static shots of desert sand. Another with the exterior of the buildings that we entered through. And then one in the upper right-hand corner caught my eye. What in the world is that? I asked, pointing to the screen in question. Mills gave a chuckle, pulling up a chair at the small desk and grabbing the nearby mouse. With a few clicks, he enlarged the image for me to see better. In the middle of a small all-white room sat a table. On that table was one small body, and at first I honestly thought that it was a kid. Maybe the kid of a superior officer having a nap or something while their dad was working. I don't know. But then when Mills made the picture bigger, I noticed the odd proportions of it. A massive head, long arms and legs with a small torso that seemed barely strong enough to hold up the rest of it. The gray, flushed skin was nearly a pale white that looked sickly against the walls of the room. You're kidding me, right? I asked, looking back at Mills. He smiled, shaking his head and putting the screen back on multi-view. Nope. Welcome to orientation day, kid. That there is an original, he said, taking his seat and pulling out a massive thermos before beginning to pour the contents into a mug. What did they tell you when you were assigned here? Nothing, pretty much, I said, mind swirling. There was no way that he had just confirmed the existence of aliens so casually. It was like showing me an animal in a zoo exhibit for him. All he was doing was smiling, watching as I tried to reconcile what I was seeing on the screen, scanning through different views from the cameras. I began to notice even more odd sights. A massive disc and one that had tons of tech set up all around it. A mechanic using an arc welder on one side. Another view showed something in another room. It looked like a concentrated ball of darkness, the occasional tendril reaching outward towards the door, before a light would come on, causing it to snap back into place. Then another room with one lone person sitting in a chair, dressed like your everyday civilian with just a weird grin on his face. All of it looked so out of place to the regular human, but Mills was smiling at me like it was just another day. So what is all this? Well, what have you heard about Roswell 1947? He shot back at me, and I shrugged as he continued. Doppelgangers, dark matter, all kinds of weird stuff out there that the regular Joe doesn't get to know about. Come on, you want some coffee? So you mean all the little green men cartoons and stuff like that? They're all real. Like not even an exaggeration or change to how they look. I sat next to him, taking the mug of coffee that he offered and sipping it slow. It burned a little, but that burn was helping to distract me from the crisis going on in my head at the moment. Best way to hide something is to do it in plain sight, he retorted. And they're not green, as you can see. More of a gray pallor, though they look a lot like a corpse in most lighting. That one there is perfectly healthy though, as far as we can tell. How can you tell? It looks dead. Well, we don't have anything that can pierce its skin. And of course, vitals aren't going to be the same as what we measure for ourselves. But they have picked up brainwaves, from as far as 60 feet away even. That's why that room has lead walls 3 feet thick. That thing will start talking into your brain if you're close enough. He muttered, his face flickering for a moment from being playful to a look of horror. Telepathy? I asked. He only nods. Some crazy Professor X stuff if I've ever seen it. I went through it myself on one of my first guard duties here. They didn't have the walls thick enough yet, and when I passed by on rounds, it started screaming in my head. I nearly choked on the hot coffee, earning myself a coughing fit in the process. What did it say? It begged me to let it go. And then when I realized that I couldn't do that, it started begging me to kill it. It hasn't moved from that table in almost 80 years it's been here, so I think it's paralyzed or something, totally unable to move. Probably happened in the crash. Was like it was reading my mind though, because I barely got the thought out and it was screaming curses at me for letting it live. Yeah, like I had a choice. Uncle Sam would have me erased from existence if I did that. He looked around the monitors. Can't say I blame it for asking though. Must be a heck of an existence just to be stuck there like that. I just couldn't compute what was happening. Somewhere in my brain was a voice going, well, of course aliens exist, while a whole other section was telling me that this makes everything that I've ever known a total lie. Why did I even get picked for this post? I'm nothing remarkable. I haven't done anything bad to piss off superiors. So why would they put me here and shatter my entire worldview? Did somebody really just hate me? Or was I just another faceless rank that they tossed on the job? Just don't let it get to you too bad, alright? Mills said, a genuine concern on his face now. Hey, I know it's a lot to take in, but trust me, it gets normal after a while. Just don't think too hard on any of it. The rest of the day was spent watching monitors and doing rounds. Between our patrols, that Mills clued me in on the gas that were kept around here. The gray was obviously the big deal, but the other things on screen were a whole other ball game of weird. The disc thing was the ship the gray arrived in. Not too big of a surprise there. Mills said that they haven't been able to crack the thing since the crash, though. There's no door in and no visible way out, and nothing we have can get through the hole, though the guy with the arc welder gave it his best for about 3 hours before finally calling it quits. Dark matter was what he called the massive darkness in the lighted room. Said he wasn't sure where the heck they found it, but anything that went into the dark never came out. There were at least 10 high-powered UV lamps in that room that acted as a deterrent, and apparently it could assimilate any sort of shadow or darkness, potentially using it to escape. By far the creepiest one, though, was the doppelganger. Mills had mentioned to me that it had breached containment once before, able to nearly perfectly imitate any human that it wants. About brought the entire place down and killed 5 guards before they got it back into a cell. It just sat there, totally rigid, upright, smiling and huge with pointed and human teeth that gave away that it wasn't one of us. The thing gave me a shiver every time the rotating cameras passed back over it. I went home that night unable to sleep. I know it seems cliche, but finding out that we aren't alone in this universe is terrifying. Like ruin your entire worldview level stuff. I was raised a Baptist, and even though I didn't hold to it, I started to question if God was even real. And if he was, why would he make anything like what was being kept in Area 51? That was 4 days ago. The next 2 days were uneventful for the most part. Some conspiracy theorists were trying to climb one of the fences near the upper base, but here underground in the lower base, nobody knew that we were there. Mills about drove me out of my mind with small talk. The guy is nice and everything, but when you're looking at aliens and deadly mimics on security cameras, it seems kind of trivial to discuss your favorite food or what was on television the night before. Last night, though, everything changed. I got in for my first solo guard duty. Guess 3 days of training was expected to be enough time to acclimate myself to the horrors of the universe Uncle Sam was hiding deep below the Nevada desert. Wish I had called out, if we're being honest. Around 9:30, not long after the last rays of sunlight had finally faded over the horizon, I went on my first patrol of the night. Through the long tunnel down to the cells area, a long hallway each holding cells about 30 feet apart with most of that space filled with solid concrete between rooms. There were other guards on duty, of course. Each cell had 2 men posted outside, ready in case anything might make a break for it. From the cells, it was back upstairs to upper base and R&D where they were trying to crack the disc once again. This time with a massive laser setup that looked like it could do some gnarly damage if aimed elsewhere. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. When I got back to the monitor room, it was around 10:30. And going through the cameras, and nothing was really out of the ordinary. The dark matter had the UV lights all the way up, a normal precaution during the night hours. Why, when we were over 100 feet below ground, is beyond my pay grade. It's not like sunlight is reaching down here to help during the day. The doppelganger was sitting and staring into the corner. I didn't stay on the camera for too long because it made me shiver involuntarily. It was like no matter if it was facing you or not, it could always see you. I swear that it was watching me more than I was watching it, and there was no way that it could see me. Eventually, I hit the outer cameras. These things were all over the surface, disguised as cactuses, shrubbery, random rocks. Whatever could hide a camera had one in it, covering every possible inch of the surface above the real base. It was camera 46 that stood out tonight, though. I don't know if I would have noticed it if it weren't a clear night. Every star in the sky was visible through the cams, shining bright to show the entire desert. Except right up in the top left side of the camera's view. There the stars were blinking and moving ever so slightly, wavering from side to side like something was swinging them around for its own amusement. As I stared, it began to affect more of the stars nearby. nearly engulfing everything in view before finally settling in. As I looked closer, reaching for my radio to call one of the surface guards, something flashed. Every camera went out along with the lights. The base shut down completely for a moment, darkness taking over as whatever flashed outside cut off the electricity. Before I could even reach for a flashlight, it was back on though. My face was mirrored on the black screen, a look of fear in my eyes. I booted everything back up, looking close as it took its sweet time, desperate to bring camera 46 back up so that I could see what was going on. My worried expression stared back at me as alarms began going off across the base. Attention, lockdown protocols are now active. Please stay at your post and report any strange occurrences. Lockdown protocols are now active. Do not under any circumstances open the cell doors. The screen came back on, but it wasn't on camera 46. Instead, there was my own face still staring back at me, but this time in full HD color. Rows of sharp teeth and a huge grin smiling right at me. I nearly fell back out of my chair when I realized that the doppelganger was staring straight into the camera and taunting me. I don't know how it had taken my face, whether it could just sense me there through the camera or it just did it randomly, but it freaked me out. Wash, what are you doing in there, man? The radio started cackling. I could barely hear it through my own racing heartbeat. One of these superior officers on the base calling for me to check in. Meanwhile, the doppelganger was still just staring at me over the screen, daring me to make some kind of move or come after it. My hand shaky and reaching for the radio, I pushed the button down to talk back. Yes, sir, I'm here. My voice sounded distant, frail. The smile on the doppelganger seemed to get bigger as my fear grew. What happened out there? Did you see anything on the surveillance? He shot back. There was something in the sky like it was shimmering. Then a flash and everything went out. I stammered back. Oh, son of a... They're back. He was shouting now. Who's back? Good God, you would think if there was some history of attacks on this place, they would have clued me in so I could keep an eye out. The Greys, he replied. And that was when a huge explosion sent a tremor through the building. Switching through the cameras back to the one above ground, I could see that the sky wasn't empty anymore. There were at least 3 discs, just like the one being kept down here in R&D, hovering in the sky. One fired off a thin beam of light towards the ground, causing another tremor to rock the base. Lights flickered but didn't quite go out this time. I need somebody with eyes outside to answer me. What is happening? Another voice came over the radio. Multiple hostiles spotted over lower and upper bases. We're under attack. Somebody else answered. Clicking through the screens, even more of the discs were visible over the above-ground base, already firing off shots at the building up there and sending them up in flames. It took everything in me not to just sit in the corner and cower, desperate to believe that this was just a bad dream. We've got worse problems. The dark matter escaped when the power went out. It's not looking good, he said. Should I run? I was trying to come up with any kind of plan to get out of here, forget my job. The only means of escape that I knew was through the tunnel back up to the upper base though. Even if I had managed to escape up there, there's still the problem of these flying saucers that would probably evaporate me on sight. Maybe my best hope was to just stay down here out of sight and out of mind, and wait for everything to calm down before I escape. Another voice over the radio screaming out in pain. Help! Send reinforcements to upper base. They're coming in. I flipped the cameras over, watching as the discs let out an even larger beam of light. On the ground where they shone, more of the aliens suddenly began to appear. They looked just like the one laying on the table down the hallway, but far more dangerous. A soldier moved towards them, raising his gun and firing off a couple of rounds at one of the aliens' massive heads. The bullet stopped in front of it like the Matrix, hovering in midair for a moment before falling harmlessly to the ground below. The gray didn't take that particularly well. Honestly, I can't say that I would blame it. Getting shot at is never something that you just shrug off. But it simply looked at the soldier, barely even moving its head. What I saw next was something that no horror movie or years of watching Live Leak could have prepared me for. Something picked the shooter up, raising him into the air with invisible hands. He struggled against it, begging it to let him go. Before anybody else could step up to help, though, he began folding in on himself. I could hear the bones cracking over the cameras. Thank God, but I could vaguely hear his screams of pain as they were caught by the small microphone. He kept folding smaller and smaller until he was barely the size of a baseball, compressed into an orb of flesh and pulverized bone, dripping blood as it hovered there over the ground. Oh my God, I muttered as the gray simply moved its head slightly, sending the flesh ball flying through the stomach of another soldier that was approaching. It went straight through the poor guy, making a huge hole as it blew chunks of intestines and bone through his back. The gray continued on, unimpeded as it simply crushed anyone that got in its way. I could only watch in terror as it walked calmly through a dozen men, taking them all out without even lifting a finger. More began to beam down to the surface, following it toward its goal and joining the march. "Fall back. Air support is inbound." The radio crackled to life once more. On one of the big monitors, I could see a jet take off from one of the nearby runways, already beginning to veer back around so that it could fire a shot at the discs floating nearby. 2 choppers took off around the same time, taking their own positions close by. Before I knew it, the plane and choppers all fired off their shots, aiming for the cluster of discs. A bright flash of light came from the disc closest to the ground, causing munitions to explode in midair before they could even touch the alien vessels. A smaller laser erupted from it next, quickly spinning around the edge of the disc. As it passed through the choppers and plane in a clean arc, they split, flames engulfing them from the subsequent explosion. It was pure chaos outside. Nothing that we had could possibly stand up to these things. There was no other choice but to run. Except I couldn't. The Greys would be coming through the tunnel and that was my only way out. The other way was the cells, and after hearing about the darkness escaping, I don't think it was worth the risk. All I could do was wait. There's no point risking a direct run-in unless I wanted to die horribly. No, it was time to hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. I got up, closed the door and locked it, and tried to move what spare furniture that I had in front to block it off further. If anything got in here, I only had my handgun on me, and God knows that was like hunting a bear with a water gun. Nope, I gotta play this smart and avoid any kind of confrontation. If only it was that easy. I kept my eyes on the monitors after that, tracing movements of the Greys while keeping an eye on the lower cells. They were, well, the dark matter obviously wasn't in its cell anymore. The lights were on, but they were simply illuminating the bright white room now. Where the darkness had managed to go, I'm not really sure. There were a dozen guards stationed at each end of the cell block though, each shining a UV light around, trying to illuminate any shadowy corners where it could have been hiding. Another explosion made the ground under my feet tremble. The Greys had broken through the tunnel now and begun a slow but deliberate descent towards the lower base. They would probably pass me in around 10 minutes, meaning that I just needed to keep holding out. The other monitors showed that my time here was coming to an end though. The lights flickered when that explosion came through, plunging the cell block hallway into total darkness for just a fraction of a second. That was all that the dark matter had needed though. It must have used that brief time to flank around the soldiers at one end of the hallway, and as they were still flinging their lights around desperately, shadows suddenly began to swallow them one by one. It was like, well, it was almost cartoonish. They were just falling right into these massive pits of darkness that would appear on the wall or the floor, like a cartoon gag, but when they got sucked in it looked painful. Like they were entering a black hole and being torn into shreds as it pulled them in. "Hey man, let me in." Somebody began knocking at my door. They sounded terrified, and I can't say I blame them. "Come on, they're coming. Don't let them get me, please." "Hold on, I've got to move the furniture." I shouted back through, starting to move the chairs. "Please, Wash, hurry. They're gonna kill me if they see me." He shouted back through as I was starting to unlock the door. I froze instead, a hand just about to turn the deadbolt and let him through. Slowly, I turned back to the monitors, afraid that I was right about what I was about to see. The only other person on base that I had spoken to and given my name was the commanding officer on upper base and Mills. Neither of them were here tonight. Sure enough, as I faced the monitor, I saw the room that the doppelganger was being held in. Empty. "Wash, let me in," the voice shouted again. Something was off about it, like it was more than one voice saying the same thing, but talking out of turn so that they didn't quite harmonize. "Let me in, let me in." All I could do was pile the chairs in front of the door again, desperately hoping that it would go away. I don't know how it knew my name, but when it spoke, my blood ran cold. There was pure malice in its voice, and all I could feel was that it was going to hurt me. I got this distinct feeling that it didn't want to kill me though, only inflict as much pain as it could. My blood ran cold as I made my way back behind my desk, climbing under it and holding hands over my ears as it just kept screaming at me. The voice kept changing, turning into other people as it first begged me to let it in, and then turned more violent, demanding that I open the door for it to get through. Before long, it must have gotten bored though, because it stopped knocking on the door and shouting. I waited a few minutes, afraid if I came out of my hiding spot, it would just be waiting there on the other side of the desk. That huge grin full of teeth, ready to devour me within seconds as soon as it saw me. I took a deep breath, crawling out little by little as the monitors above me blared with chaos. Everything on upper base was a disaster. Fire all over the place. Even if I could get through the tunnel and get back there, making it through the flames was going to be a whole other challenge. God, I didn't even know if my car was crushed out there considering all the carnage. A walk through the desert in the middle of the night was almost as dangerous as the aliens attacking from every direction. The lights flickered again as another explosion rocked the base. Looking at the monitors, I could see the grays approaching my section of the tunnel. All I could do was keep quiet, hoping that they didn't try to look in here as they continued along their warpath. Too much to ask, especially for my luck. The first gray that was leading the pack stopped in front of my door. It raised a hand and I heard the metal begin to bend and creak. Diving back onto the desk, I pulled myself in as much as I could, desperate to avoid being seen as it ripped the door from the hinges without even touching it. Pretty sure that I involuntarily squealed a little when the door hit the wall, falling to the floor with an even louder bang as the gray stepped into the room. I saw its feet as it walked around for a moment, inspecting its surroundings for whatever it was looking for. It stopped in front of the monitor, staying there for the longest minute of my life, as it studied them before walking back out, leading the rest of the grays forward. At that point, I could only assume they were after the one that was laying in the cell down the hall, and guess aliens have the same code of no man left behind that we do. Who says that we have nothing in common, right? Too bad they were slaughtering us to make sure that it happened. I have to get out of here. There are no excuses now. I was exposed to the dangers outside without a door on the hinges. I had to move fast. Looking at the monitors, the grays were far enough ahead in the tunnel that I could slip out without them noticing. I poked my head out, making sure there were no stragglers that could fold me like origami with their mind, and I started my escape. Running as fast as I could towards upper base, I was quickly out of breath. The incline in here was killer, and God knows it's at least a couple of miles directly up. But nevertheless, I've got to keep trying. I managed to get maybe halfway there before I came across the body. It was slumped next to a wall, head down and blood all over the front of its uniform. As I got closer, trying to give it a wide berth, it began to cough. I paused, unsure of what my next move should be. If it's another soldier, the obvious answer is that I should help, right? But then there was the other chance nagging at the back of my mind. I've had this pit in my stomach since the run-in with the doppelganger. This guy could just be that thing trying to lure and prey. If it is, well, then trying to help him is a death sentence. Help. A weak voice came through the coughing. Ah, heck, I can't leave them in good conscience to die on the slight chance that they could be that monster. I know it goes against self-preservation, but I can't leave him here. Hey man, what got you? I said, moving toward him slowly. His head tilted a little, looking for where my voice was coming from. As he looked up, I could see that although he was pretty messed up, he was definitely human. His throat was slashed pretty bad though, and judging by the amount of blood everywhere, he wasn't making it out of this tunnel. That thing disguised itself as one of us, he gurgled out. The doppelganger then. It had been through here already. Was I going to have to face it when I get to the upper base? Before I could think further, he kept talking. He tore out their throats and his teeth, ate them while they were still screaming. I tried stabbing him, but he slashed me. Oh, I don't think I'm going to make it. It's cold. Hey, stay with me, okay? I'm going to get help and come back here for you, all right? I said. Is that death? He asked, pointing towards the tunnel going to the lower base. I looked forward, squinting as the light seemed to dim. It was definitely getting darker. Uh-oh, was all that I could get out before a long shadow appeared in the middle of the room, steadily getting closer as it made its way out. God knows what this thing can do once it hits outside, but I wasn't about to stay around here and figure it out. I grabbed the soldier, hoisting him over my shoulder and starting to move as fast as we could. This guy was dead weight, almost cold to the touch too, not able to contribute at all to escaping certain death. We got a few feet before I tripped over one of his legs while trying to haul his limp body, dropping him as I fell to the ground. The shadow caught up, taking hold of one of his feet first and then slowly drawing the rest of him in. Whatever blood that he had left in there slowly seeping out as it crumpled his body into shadow. Look, it might seem like I got over it quick, but I promise once the dark had him, there was no saving him. Instead, I ran my butt off, heading towards upper base as fast as I could in the hopes that I could outrun the primordial dark that was still devouring a man behind me. After a minute, I could tell that I was getting close. Smoke began to fill the tunnel, causing me to nearly choke as I ran, gasping for breath desperately. Emerging from the tunnel almost made me want to go back in and chance it with the darkness. The discs filled the sky above and everything was on fire. I had to move carefully, afraid that they were going to vaporize me in seconds if they caught sight of me. My best bet was to go around the main building and find my way to the parking lot. If my car wasn't totaled, then I could maybe wait out the discs until they leave, and then get the heck out of Dodge. It was a pretty far-fetched plan, but it was all that I had at the time. Slowly, sticking to whatever shadows that I could with the fear that they might devour me any second, I made my way from the tunnel entrance to the R&D building. Logically, the parking lot was on the other side of it, so I could just go straight through the building and out the other side, minimizing my risk of being seen by the discs or the Greys as they made the return trip. Inside of R&D, it was rough. There were various aircraft in differing stages of construction, with pieces and parts all over the place. Different testing arrays lit up on one side of the massive hangar, while down at the far end there was something making a continuous beeping noise. Further on to my left, I could see one of the discs, the one that we had in our inventory from the old crash. The big laser cutter was still sitting nearby, lights blinking on a control panel to show that it had been abandoned mid-use. A loud crash made me jump. Just up ahead in shadows between the fluorescent bulbs was a soldier. He had pushed something over, seemingly on the hunt for something in the huge hangar. I tried to hide from it, trying to quietly duck towards one of the walls and out of the fluorescent lights where it could see me. Unfortunately for me, this place was a mess, and I tripped over a rolling toolbox that was in the path, causing it to crash to the ground. Not sure what I expected to happen, but the creature let out a roar when it heard the noise, now aware that it wasn't alone in here. The roar was quickly stifled though, instead being replaced by a discordant voice that phased in and out of normal range, moving from male to female, adult to child as it tried to modulate. As it turned, I kept going to try and hide, even though it felt futile. "Come here," it shouted, moving towards where I was ducked down behind a workbench. "You son of a, get over here." As it got closer, I could feel the sense of dread in my stomach growing. I couldn't make out the face covered in shadows, but where its eyes were seemed to be shining, reflecting little bits of light like a predator's will in the dark, looking for its next meal. I don't know if it could see in the dark, but I could swear that it was honing in on me with ease. "Wash, it's you!" The doppelganger shouted now. Must have seen me. I had to make a run for it. Hell with giving my position away. If I was faster, I could make it to the far door and get out of here before it had a chance to catch up. "Come here!" It moved faster. Faster than I had ever seen any human move in my life, seemingly going down on all fours to run at me faster. As it closed in, I fell back, crashing to the ground beside the disc as it gained ground on me. Looking around, I grabbed my gun from its holster, leveling it at the doppelganger and firing. My aim was good, and the bullet hit it right in the face, making its head blast back for a moment. "Now why would you do that?" it said again. The voice was more discordant this time, hundreds of different inflections and tones all fighting for supremacy under the tide of noise. The prevailing feeling that I got from it now wasn't just malice, it was anger. I had pissed it off and now it really wanted to hurt me, even more so than before. I scrambled, firing off more shots into the monster. They each hit but did nothing when it came to slowing it down. The bullets were useless, and as I looked around, my only options were crowbars, various mechanic tools, and the laser. I have no idea how to use this thing, so I just had to hope that when it was left here, they had already primed it so it was ready to go. The doppelganger lurched frontward, screaming at me in an ancient language that I couldn't understand. I turned the dial on the console all the way towards the top to max it out, and hit the green button that was lit up next to it. The light that came out of that thing was practically blinding. I closed my eyes, turning my head as it flashed. I could hear that creature screaming even louder now, and smelled something burning as the laser hit it. After a moment, the light died down and I finally opened my eyes. The doppelganger lay on the ground, half its face melted and the entire torso on fire. It was twitching on the ground, still cursing me in that ancient language, but unable to keep moving. I'll be honest, I wasn't going to wait to see what happened to it. I ran, heading towards the back door and bursting through it. On the other side of the road, there was the parking lot. My car was parked in the back corner, and from the looks of it, it was still intact. I kept to the back wall, desperate to avoid being seen, and continued slowly moving across the road towards my car. After a moment, I finally made it, pulling out keys and unlocking the door manually so that the lights didn't alert anything to my presence. Before I could get in, I looked across at the burning base and tunnel entrance to see the Greys emerge. The one that had been prisoner was floating alongside the others, levitating out of the tunnel with whatever powers they had used to tear dozens of soldiers apart. As they emerged, the discs began to shine their lights down, beaming them up into the ships one by one. Just to be safe, I ducked down in my seat and waited to see if they would leave. After the last Grey was picked up, the discs fired off a few more lasers before rising into the sky, suddenly blinking out and disappearing completely. As they left, a laser suddenly hit the R&D building, causing it to explode and hit me with a blast of heat. That was the last thing that I needed to tell me that this wasn't the place to be. Turning the key, I threw it into drive and hit the gas, nearly smashing into another car when it had lurched forward. I steered around it, hitting the road and flooring the pedal towards the entrance. The guard arm was down, but I smashed straight through it, unwilling to wait for it to raise. Not like there was still guards at the gate to raise it anymore. The flames were in my rear view for almost 20 minutes, burning into the night sky as I drove as far away as I could. I came home surprised that a cop didn't pull me over for speeding. At some point, a bunch of fire trucks passed me, heading towards the base to deal with the chaos that I had left behind. About 6 hours ago, I walked into the door of my apartment and I haven't looked back. Typing this up just seems silly now, considering all that I've gone through in the past 12 hours. I've been looking out my window every 5 minutes, waiting to see black vans roll up ready to cart me off to some black site where I'll never be heard from again. I don't think I'll be lucky enough to have some aliens come break me out if they do take me, but dang it, they are real. They're out there and we're not alone. If this country is smart, they won't try picking any more fights with them. The month is May and the year is 2024. It's a beautiful sunny day and I'm about to go for a little drive with my family. I love my wife, I love my 2 daughters. No matter what happens, all of those things are true. And everything else is a terrifying and terrible lie. That's me, that's who I am. I don't want to forget that. I don't know how much longer I have, so I need to share my story. I need to explain what's happened to me, so that I might save others. Possibly, I don't know anymore. I don't know whether anyone can be saved from the tall crawl, the thing that lurks behind the veil of reality, an entity that tricks us so convincingly into thinking that it isn't real. But it is real, very, very real. And if its victims refuse to follow its rules, they suffer in the most direful and unimaginable ways. So here's my story. Here's my account of events from the past half a year. This recounting of events will serve as the final coherent record of the nightmare that I've been enduring for the past 6 months. As I said, I don't know how much longer I have. Don't know how much longer I have as me, I should say. In short, I appease an entity that was named by the one who cursed me as Tall Crawl. I don't understand its nature. It shifts shapes and seems unbound by physical laws. All I know is that, as I said, I must follow its rules or bad things will happen. Asinine, ridiculous rituals designed to protect not only myself, but my loved ones. 1. Do whatever he bids and do it twice if you doubt yourself. 2. Walk no fewer than 11 steps per hour. 3. Don't walk in the shade of a backwards tree. I'm aware that those rules make no sense, that they seem to serve no purpose. No purpose that makes any sense to us anyhow. And you would be right. You see, it'd be simple to say that Tall Crawl has a wicked design, that he simply relishes in my psychological torture, that he forces me to submit to as well, performing rituals that are utter nonsense. But the truth, I think, is worse than that. The truth is that these rules matter to him or it. Matter in some way that I do not understand. That is what terrifies me. Of course, nobody believes me, and why would they? Unless you experience this hell for yourself, it seems like a work of fiction, like the symptoms of mental illness. One particular mental illness, I should say. Various psychiatrists have informed me with absolute confidence that I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't blame them for thinking so. After conducting hours of research on that debilitating disorder, I would say that I have all the requisite symptoms. Crippling anxiety, horrid thoughts swirling in my head, and rituals that help to temporarily dull the anxiety, only for it to spike again, usually twice as severely the next time. I'm 99% there, 99% identical to a typical OCD survivor. But that 1%, oh, that troublesome 1%, it's what derails the reassuring argument every time. Yes, reassuring. It would be lovely for those psychiatrists to be correct. You see, I would have been thrilled to have obsessive compulsive disorder, as terrifying and anxiety-inducing as that mental illness seems to be. I'd be thrilled to have it because I'm dealing with something far worse. OCD would be the lesser of two evils by a country mile. There's a big difference with what's happening to me. With obsessive compulsive disorder, the horror that takes place in one's head. For me, however, it's all too real. Whenever I fail to follow these rules, I don't simply feel anxious. Something terrible actually happens. It all started just before Christmas, my least favorite time of the year. Not only due to the icy roads and the frozen tinge to the air, nipping at one's skin painfully. Not even due to the stresses of the holiday season itself, with family get-togethers that often end with people being upset, and presents that never seem to be quite right, where my nephews and nieces are concerned. No, this is my least favorite time of the year because it was once my favorite time of the year. I know that makes no sense, but if you had ever known my father, you would get it. You see, he developed Alzheimer's in late June of 2022, and the past 2 Christmases have just been utterly dreadful. All of the family gets upset. There's burnt turkeys, incorrect presents, and dicey drives were insignificant when Grandpa David showed up. He was a warm presence, a beacon of joy and light for all of us. And since his mental deterioration, there has been a deterioration in the very fabric of our family, in our unity and strength. I was vulnerable, and that was why it happened to me that late December of 2023. That was what let the tall crawl inside. My daughter Claire and I drove an hour to visit her grandfather in the care home. It was a dull journey even during the warmer seasons, but one that I had been making every other day since he had moved into the home, back in July of 2022. And after that long and unpleasant drive, there's an even longer and less pleasant experience awaiting me inside the building itself. Now for clarity, I don't turn my nose up at the damp walls, the harsh-voiced staff members, or even the pungent smell of urine. No, it's the cries that get to me. The cries of the residents in that place. The ones who feel as if they've been left to rot, even when their loved ones visit multiple times a week, for they remember none of it. I hate it. I hate the pain, the anguish of those who suffer from the disease. What an accursed end-of-life experience. Some cruel joke from a natural force or some sadistic puppeteer of our puny existences, relishing in our suffering as it watches us from the great depths of the cosmos. Sorry, I got a little lost there. You see, I'm not myself either, and we'll be getting to that. I apologize for the dread. Once you realize the nightmare that I've been enduring for the past half a year, however, you'll understand how I've come to be this way, how I've come to be so frightened and timid and fragile, how I've come to be frightened not of the world around me, but of the terrifying forces hidden beneath the surface, the things in which I didn't used to believe. Monsters in the dark, lurking under the bed, around the corners of the farthest walls of the mind, waiting to whisper not so sweet nothings. "I need my wallet," Dad grumbled as he often did. 4 words that he had repeated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe thousands at that point. The tireless repetition had worn me thin, not from boredom but sorrow. As I said, it was painful to see my father that way. The proud David Roberts reduced to a lost soul. It was harrowing and horrifying in equal measure. And the nightmare I would soon learn had not even begun. I sighed, sharing a look with my daughter, who smiled softly at me. It was perhaps harder for Claire, as she was not only seeing her grandfather wither and decay and lose his soundness of mind. No, she was also seeing her father wither and decay, seeing me break down emotionally. A man who, not to toot my own horn, has always been firm, dependable, steady, and far from emotional. I like to view myself as the one to whom people come when they're struggling emotionally. But that past year had taken its toll. I had been trying to hold myself together for my family, but the fact of the matter is that Dad's mental decline had crushed me. I love that man, and I still do love him, but he's gone, and I think I finally accept that. I accept a lot of things about identity now, about how easily it can slip away when something evil and without clear purpose worms its way into one's mind, into one's very soul. Anyhow, as I said, I was holding myself together, just about. Barely, but undeniably, I was still me. I was still Claire's father, Laura's husband. I was still that dependable man. However, any attempts that I had been making to maintain some semblance of composure and sturdiness in the face of such a nightmare, it would cease by the end of that very evening. For I would face a hardship that I did not and still do not know how to overcome. Though I hope and pray for a way that I've just not seen it yet. "You don't need your wallet, Dad," I said gently, taking my father's hand, which was coated in ridges and bruises from all manner of incidents, bumps with door handles and wardrobes, and even a glass window, according to one member of the staff. David Roberts retracted his hand from mine and let out a snarl, like an animal that had been backed into a corner. Anger in the face of love was to be understood, given his condition, but that didn't make the blow any harder. Dad used to be such a soft and happy and loving man, so it was heartbreaking to see him become this hardened and bitter shell of himself. Dad's old southern accent returned, received pronunciation aplenty. "I'll be the judge of whether I need my wallet or not, boy, and if you continue to withhold it from me, I shall have to ask one of the busboys at this hotel to bring me a telephone. That way I'll be able to ring the cops so as to have you and this girl arrested. Would you like that? Nah, I thought not, boy. Now stop this nonsense at once and let me go home. A hotel oughtn't to operate like a prison. Heavens above." "You're not at a hotel, Dad," I said, trying to stifle another sigh. "This is where you live. I know that you keep forgetting, but I'll explain it to you again because I don't like to see you upset. This is it's a residence. Everything that you need is covered. That's why you don't need your wallet, okay?" He shook his head firmly, not buying my story. And in fairness, I was smudging the truth by simply calling the care home a residence. But in my defense, I found it best not to reveal my father's condition to him. "They want to keep me locked up in here, all of them. My daughter, my bloody son. They don't even come to visit me. Did you know that?" "Your daughter Charlotte visits you once a week, and I'm your bloody son," I replied. "I'm right here. I come to visit you most nights, Dad." "Well, tell my son that I need my wallet and I need to get out of here." Dad roared, still not quite acknowledging my identity. He likely hadn't actually processed what I had said, and still thought me to be just another member of staff at the hotel in which he believed himself to be staying. You're here for your own well-being, my daughter Claire added. You weren't safe at home, Grandpa. You kept forgetting things, injuring yourself, forgetting to eat meals. You tripped and... They have all sorts of nutters in here. Dad suddenly interrupted in a hushed whisper. The blonde one is the worst. I noticed my father's eyes wandering around the room, and grateful for the unexpected change in topic, I cast my eyes around the room to try and spot whatever he had spotted. After all, when an Alzheimer's patient surprises you by saying something different from the 3 or 4 statements repeated relentlessly throughout the day, you ought to snatch that opportunity for a new conversation, something fresh. And so I entertained Dad's sudden interest in this blonde one, who he deemed to be the worst person in the care home. I scanned the armchairs full of rambling and squirming and yelling residents, and then my eyes settled upon the person who I assumed had been the subject of my father's ire. I saw an elderly man named Michael, whose gray hair did glisten a somewhat blonde color in certain lights, squirming in his armchair. I thought back to the numerous visits that I had made over the past year and a half, and I decided that he certainly fit the bill in terms of the worst resident, from my father's perspective. Michael was certainly the loudest resident in the care home's lounge area, and that was the case every time that I visited. If my father were talking about anyone, I assumed it to be him. Michael's tears and tantrums and loud wails were often quite distracting. It was sometimes difficult to hear oneself think. Of course, not having the same mental condition as my father, I had a little more patience, a little more capacity for empathy perhaps. Well, unfortunately, Michael's struggling just like you, Dad, I explained. It's a little annoying when he talks loudly, I know, but you have to be patient with him. He's not being too loud right now, is he? We're having a nice chat. You, Claire, and me. Let's not focus on Michael. My father seemed to snap to attention. His gaze had been meandering around the room, but upon clocking what I had said, my dad locked his eyes onto Michael, the old man who was yelling so feverishly that flecks of spittle were flying onto the cheeks of the women tending to him. It was Nurse Tracy. Him? Dad asked, nodding at the old man, and then he grumbled. Oh yes, he's a right sort, a real oddball. Comes into my room at night, would you believe it? And he doesn't hear a bleeding word I say. He's always crying. Yeah, you heard me, crying. Crying and crying and crying his bleeding eyes out. He's always asking me for help, as if I know a thing about the kind of help that fella needs. An exorcism, I would wager. I tell him to get out of my room, but he doesn't listen to me. He seems almost to be talking to himself, as embarrassing as that sounds. I always tell him, this is a hotel, it's not an asylum. And he's hardly any better during the day. I mean, just look at him now, crying about that woman again. Crying about her and the thing that crawls. I raised an eyebrow, shocked not only by my father's memory, which rarely functioned any longer, but also by the nature of the story itself. Michael comes into your room at night. Dad nodded. Oh, he's a real nuisance. I might not mind too greatly, truth be told, if it weren't for his persistent tears. Always sobbing, I tell him. Do that out in the corridor if you must, but get out of my bleeding room. Well, that's not good, my daughter said. Dad, we should tell someone. I nodded. I will, Claire. She's right, Dad. It definitely isn't right for other residents to be wandering into your room. Certainly not at night when you're trying to sleep. But don't you worry, I'll make sure that I sort it out with the runner of the establishment and we'll... Huh? Dad interrupted as seemingly having lost his train of thought again. You're always blabbering on about something, aren't you, boy? All I need is my bleeding wallet. I have a right mind to call the police if you keep up this tomfoolery. You're withholding my personal property. Dad, I groaned. My father ignored me. Now listen here, I want my wallet and I want your telephone. Then I'm gonna book a taxi to take me straight home. And I shall never be returning to this place. You'd better believe that I'll ensure none of my friends have the misfortune of staying here either. Now you'd better do as I say right this instant, and maybe you'll count your lucky stars to not be named in the scathing review that I'll leave for this place. What's your name, boy? I sighed, shaking my head as I rose to my feet. I need to have a chat with the nurse about what you just told me. I'm going to leave Claire with you for a second, Dad. Is that okay? My father's glassy eyes barely registered me. He grumbled something incoherent, and Claire looked at him sadly and then turned her face up to me. When she did, I mouthed the same question to her. Is that okay? She nodded, silently telling me that she could cope with Dad. If anything, she had a better handle on dealing with him than I did. So I patted her softly on the shoulder, leaving the two of them to discuss any of the few conversations that my father liked to repeat unrelentingly. And then I walked across the lounge and cleared my throat behind the nurse who had finished tending to Michael. That shy woman named Tracy, only in her early 20s, who I had never managed to catch for more than a handful of words here and there. It wasn't that I had respected her introverted nature. It was that I had always felt somewhat inclined to avoid her, for a reason that I didn't yet understand. But I would. You see, on this day, she was different. Nurse Tracy turned to face me, and the first thing that struck me was the smile on her face. The first smile that I had ever seen on her. She had been meek and withdrawn for the 4 or 5 months that she had spent working at the care home. But now she was positively beaming with life. With energy, a kind of energy that I didn't understand. I knew only that I did not like it. That I didn't want to know what had changed her so dramatically from 2 days before, when I had last visited the care home. "Hello, Mr. Roberts," she chirpily said. "Is everything okay with your father?" I sighed deeply. "Well, yes and no, Tracy. Sorry, I don't mean to alarm you. In a sense, he's okay, he's fine, but..." Tracy shot out a hand that seized me firmly and, truth be told, alarmingly at the wrist. There was untold strength to her grip. I had never felt such strength from a man or a woman before. She didn't hurt me, but she held me so firmly to the spot that I knew, even if I were to try, I wouldn't have been able to move. And then my fearful gaze met hers, met those eyes which were looking a little bloodshot, unhealthily and unnaturally bloodshot. I paused, holding that gaze. I found myself waiting for her to fix herself, to go back to the old Tracy, to go back to being anything even marginally more human. Heck, I told myself that I would settle as soon as she simply blinked. And as she did, thankfully, but it seemed to take a few seconds too long. There had been too much of a gap. Too long spent eyeing me without letting those eyelids close. Something was wrong with her face. Everything was wrong with her face. And her words were even worse. "Spit it out, Mr. Roberts," Tracy whispered curtly, but in a faux friendly tone. A tone that seemed at odds with the content of her demand. It would have been better if she had sounded cross, but the gentleness and pleasantry of her tone only made the words more horrible. I gulped, no longer wanting to tell the nurse what was wrong, no longer wanting to spend another second speaking to her. "Well, my father told me something a little concerning." "Yes?" Tracy interjected immediately, hardly allowing me a second to breathe after finishing my sentence. "He said that..." I began and then nodded at Michael, who was sitting just behind the nurse, muttering to himself. I didn't want to draw too much attention and make him uncomfortable. "This gentleman here has been coming into his room at night. My father said that the man's been crying, asking for help with something. I don't know. I'm not too worried about what the resident's been saying. It's more about the intrusion itself. Listen, I know nothing malicious is happening. We are in a care home. People aren't well, I understand. I'm sure this gentleman has simply been getting lost, perhaps even trying to find a member of staff to assist him with, well, something. I know that he hasn't been intending to stumble into my father's room. But this is on you and your team to stop these things from happening, wouldn't you say? Tracy gasped, and it felt like another performative stunt, another disingenuous display of emotion, much like the thin veil she had draped over her anger or contempt or insidiousness when she had spoken curtly before. It was a falseness designed not only to mock, but to threaten me. And yes, I'm aware of how unnerving and disconcerting that may seem, but you weren't there, you didn't hear it. Didn't hear her awful, inhuman voice. Didn't see that awful, inhuman face. Well, that just simply won't do now, will it? Tracy eventually said before finally releasing my wrist and placing her hands on her hips. It was as if her brain had malfunctioned, had switched to standby midway through replying to me. I truly didn't want to spend another moment speaking to her, but I pushed onwards anyway, and did so in defiance of every instinct in my body. No, I started uncertainly, relieved to finally be free of the vice-like clamp on my wrist. I considered running, but my stubbornness bested my survival instinct. I didn't want to run from such a meek, young woman 20 years my junior. You're right, Tracy, it simply won't do at all. What are we going to do about this? My father's bedroom door should be locked at night, shouldn't it? Other residents shouldn't be allowed to access his room. You and the other members of staff need to ensure that the bedroom doors are kept locked. Am I off the mark, or? No, you're absolutely right, Mr. Roberts. Tracy giggled and then her face fell into a frown. Michael must be punished. My eyes widened and the alarm bell in my mind tolled at a deafening volume. Every primitive instinct in my body had started screeching at me to run. I wish that I had listened. Well, no, I choked, fearful of the woman's implication. Punished? You shouldn't be punishing anybody in this home. I'm not blaming Michael and not blaming the staff. Michael's suffering from a mental condition that. But you said it yourself. Tracy interrupted with a hiss. Michael shouldn't have wandered into your father's room. There are rules, Mr. Roberts, and rules must be followed. Don't you think so, huh? Don't you think that rules ought to be followed? I felt as if I shouldn't answer, as if that were the most dangerous question that I had ever been asked, and the most dangerous person to ever ask a thing at all. But I've never been one to listen to an uneasy gut. Call it toxic masculinity or a desperation to dismiss magical and intrusive thoughts. But I know now what I either didn't know or refused to know then, that there was nothing intrusive about the thought at all. It was the most honest and valid warning that my brain had ever given me. I should have buttoned my lips. I shouldn't have answered. Well, of course rules ought to be followed, I replied hoarsely, voice still refusing to steady. But you shouldn't punish a mentally unwell resident, Tracy. That would be against a very different set of rules. Laws, codes of ethics. Yes, there are so many sets of rules in our wonderful world, Tracy said, wording every sentence in such a disjointed and inhuman manner. And then she released a sigh. It was the sigh of a soothed woman reflecting on something joyous. Sets of rules for sets of rules for sets of rules. But then things get a little confusing, don't they? Rules don't always abide by rules. You have rules, for instance, that conflict with other rules, and on, wouldn't you say? Tracy was not herself. Worse than that, she wasn't like anybody. I know that sounds like a ridiculous exaggeration, but it's about more than what she said. It's about how she said it. I know what I felt, what I still feel. It's an emotion near impossible to describe, but I felt as if I were staring into the wide, red-stained eyes of something empty. Not a husk, no, that would have been better. There was something hiding in the supposed emptiness. There was certainly no soul behind those big brown pupils. Tinged with red around the edges, however, there was something in there. Something that I didn't want to see. Something dark that crawled past her eyes. Are you okay today? I finally plucked up the courage to ask. You seem a little out of sorts, Tracy. I have to be honest, you're just so sorry. I caught myself realizing that I was at risk of seeming impolite. Of course, it was a little too late by that point. What on earth are you doing? You've lost your head. This is all just in your mind. She's a weird girl, but she's harmless, I thought. Who are you to say that she's not quite herself? Those rational thoughts did a lot of heavy lifting, very nearly pushed out the truth. But I knew that the logical explanation for Tracy's behavior didn't quite add up. Knew that something had been wrong with the girl for quite some time, even before this odd day. She had been more than a quiet girl for those past few months. She had seemed not quite whole. She had seemed lost and frightened. Frightened, I realized. That's it. She's been frightened of something for months. I've seen it in her eyes. But she doesn't look frightened now. She looks peaceful. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to slot neatly together. I understood the significance of this transformation, this strange and horrifying new version of her. It was simply the culmination of those many quiet weeks, those weeks during which she had been silently crying for help, crying for somebody to save her from the great transformations which awaited. And I had finally noticed. But it was too late. Oh, I'm fine, Tracy cooed softly before smiling again. I'm better than fine, Mr. Roberts. I'm free. You see, I let him take the reins. She put so much emphasis on that word, him. I didn't like it. Not in the slightest, and not as I reflected on that darkness that I had seen crawling behind her retinas. What, I thought. You didn't see something behind her retinas, you maniac. That's impossible. Meanwhile, Michael was sobbing behind the nurse. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that man cried a lot. Not only during the night, supposedly, whenever the man would visit my father in his room begging for help. No, he cried whenever I was there too. Cried during all hours of the day. Sure, that's nothing unusual in a care home, but the content of his wails for help was always a little eerie and disconcerting. He was, as my father had said, was always crying about a woman, crying about something that crawled. I'm sorry for bothering you, Tracy. I eventually had the wisdom to say as I started to back away from the unsettling woman, again coming to my senses a little bit too late. I've been wasting your time. I made my point and I think we'll just leave it there. I'll let you get back to your job. Don't you want to know who's taking the reins? She asked me softly, moving forwards as I stepped backwards. I gulped. I don't know what you're saying, Tracy. I just want to. Oh, it's hard at first, she whispered, cutting me off. Following the rules, I mean. Poor Michael struggles with it too. He's not quite ready yet, but he's nearly there. So nearly. And I struggled with it too. You saw me battling away for months and months, but I don't have to battle anymore. He does all the work for me. I had my chance and I blew it. Do you understand? When I slipped up and made a little whoopsie daisy, he was there to help me. Michael, I asked. She smiled and shook her head. Tracy, I'm not following a word you're saying. Is this some sort of nervous breakdown? Do you need to get somebody out here to talk to you? You're starting to unnerve me, I said. I just wanted to sort out the situation with Michael so that my father... Oh, Michael has nothing to do with this. Tracy whispered and she pointed a shaky finger at the ceiling. I'm talking about the thing that crawls, the thing that whispers, the thing that we must obey if we don't want the bad and the worst to happen. I shivered and found that my shoes weren't shuffling backwards across the tiles any longer. My feet were firmly glued to the floor, either by a force beyond me or within me. I tried to lift them, but the fear in the force beyond was too powerful, and I felt it. A darkness was coming. It was already there. It had always been there, perhaps, within or without. I'm talking about doing as he says. The nurse continued in a labored voice. Her breathing had become heavy and coarse, rough around the edges. You must always do as he says, Mr. Roberts. Please remember that. If you forget all else, remember that. It's the first rule, maybe the only rule that truly matters. You do as he says because he's the only one to be trusted. We doubt ourselves, but we never doubt him. And if you doubt that you followed the rule properly, you do it again, okay? Do it twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times. Understand? I didn't manage to speak, didn't manage to move, didn't even manage to tremble in fear. I was wrapped in a body of stone. You must do as he says, and if you don't, there will be hell to pay. You don't want that, do you, Mr. Roberts? You want to still be in charge, don't you? I'll let that happen if you play by the rules. But the weaker you get, the more he worms his way inside until you belong to him. If he takes the wheel, you'll never break one of his rules again. But you'll never be you again, you understand? Excuse me, I yelled at another nurse named Rich. I need some assistance with your colleague. Rich frowned but nodded and started heading over. Moments before he did, Tracy leaned forward and whispered to me, You must do as the tall crawl bids. You must walk 11 steps per hour. Do his bidding and do not question it. Then you may be just about okay, just about human, just about alive. You may in fact be luckier than most. You may be allowed to hold on to the reins, to keep control of your autonomy. Tracy, Rich interjected, coming to a halt between the two of us. His eyes flitted from Tracy to me and back to Tracy. What's happening? She smiled and shrugged. Oh, no idea, Richard. Mr. Roberts seems a little distressed. It's your coworker who's a little distressed. She's not right in the head. She's been saying all sorts of unsettling things. I don't know whether she's having some sort of psychotic breakdown, but it's not right. What do you mean, sir? Rich asked. We were just having a disagreement about how to handle Michael. Tracy interrupted timidly, demeanor having shifted. She was a social chameleon and she had switched back to a relatively human setting. Mr. Roberts became quite loud and animated about the entire thing. That's not true, Ed. I began to shout before quieting as Rich lifted an eyebrow at me. I had played right into Tracy's hands, strengthening her narrative by losing my cool. I didn't have the mental or physical energy to get stuck in an argument and to try to fight any corner, so I conceded. You know what? Forget it. I've told you what you need to know, Rich, so it's up to you to do something about it. Tracy's not right in the head, but I don't care who you employ as long as my father is treated properly. It felt good, you know. It felt good to pretend that the interaction had been normal. To go through the proper line of authority. To treat Tracy as if she were simply a slightly strange woman. One going through some kind of mental crisis. Calling Rich over and explaining the problem in human terms had, for just a moment, helped to quiet the warning bell in my head, to loosen the knot in my chest. But reality is a cold and crushing force. As much as I tried to reduce the horror to something small and manageable and human, I knew what I felt. I knew that something inexplicable was at work. Something that crawled beyond just the eyes of the woman ahead of me. "We'll treat your dad properly, Mr. Roberts," Rich said. "Of course we will. We do treat him properly. Any complaints that you have are justified, but I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Just make sure that his door is locked at night, okay?" I said. "I don't want Michael or any of the other residents wandering into his room anymore. You understand?" Tracy gasped. "Why, of course, Mr. Roberts. That was all you needed to say." Rich sighed and walked away, mumbling something about not getting paid enough for this. And then Tracy smiled and mouthed 2 words at me. 11 stabs. I didn't have the courage to look at that terrifying lady a moment longer. As I turned and scurried back to my father and Claire, who was frowning over the commotion that I had just caused, I became aware of a darkening, a heavy cloud hanging over the room before passing a moment later. I still managed to convince myself initially that it had been a figment of my own imagination, that anybody else would call me crazy should I mention it to them, just as with the crawling shape that I had seen, and possibly behind Nurse Tracy's eyes. I thought myself crazy, and I was the one experiencing it. The one who knew deep down that it was real. "Why were you two arguing?" my daughter asked as I sat down. "It should be a pretty simple thing to rectify, shouldn't it? Just make sure that Grandpa's door is locked. What's so hard about that? It's why we pay so much money for him to live here, isn't it?" I shook my head and joked out. That's Nurse Tracy for you. She's a head case." My father looked into my eyes and I noticed that his own were teary. "I told you the blonde one is the worst in here." And then it clicked. And as I looked back at the blonde-haired Tracy who was back to tending to residents as if nothing had just happened, I realized my father hadn't been speaking ominously about Michael. He had been speaking about the nurse. The hour-long car ride back was stiff and silent. The mood was always a little somber during those drives home, but it had been a particularly eventful evening, and given that my daughter was feeling a little unsettled by the night's events, imagine how unnerved I felt. You might still struggle, of course, because my story is only words to you, but you'll understand soon, when I tell you what happened to following Tracy's warning of the tall crawl. You'll realize that it was never in my head at all. The quietness of the car was one thing, but the fear was another. The burgeoning terror at the back of my throat. Not my mind, but my throat. Have you ever experienced such a thing? I was as if something were scratching and clawing and crawling its way up my esophagus trying to get out of me, or trying to work its way up to the surface so as to take the reins. The minutes of the car journey ticked by, and as they did, I became increasingly aware of something horrifying, that the fear was building towards something, towards a moment of calamity. I could feel it. Something bad was coming. And then I remembered how I had felt before getting in the car. I had been elated just before my daughter and I had walked out of the care home, felt as if I had completed something, accomplished some mission, followed some rule. 11 steps. It sounds insane, I know, but I had felt good because I had followed Tracy's rule. I had walked 11 steps within that first hour since she first told me about them. Of course, I had walked more than 11 steps to reach the car, but that was the bare minimum that I needed to achieve to appease this thing, of which the nurse had spoken. I had done it and completed the rule, completed both rules. Do whatever he bids and do it twice if you doubt yourself. Walk no fewer than 11 steps per hour. Anyhow, as the car journey home had passed and I had remained seated in the driver's chair, that gloom returned. The heavy black which had hung over the lounge of the care home. The terror had built because I hadn't done my next set of 11 steps. Another hour had nearly passed and I had remained firmly on my butt. "Have you lost your marbles?" I chastised myself, almost laughing out loud. "Are you seriously talking about following the rules of some deluded care home worker? You don't need to do a thing that mentally unwell woman says. You don't need to be scared of some tall crawl taking the reins. Get a grip, you idiot. You need to report her to social services, if anything. You should have reported her then and then, but you didn't. Why is that?" Because I was scared. Because Tracy was like no human that I had ever met before. Because the fear she passed to me like some kind of contagion was worse than any fear that I had ever felt. And I had no explanation for that. I'm just a man, an ordinary man, a mentally stable man. I've never really had problems with anxiety or depression or any other mental disorders. I'm as neurotypical as they come. Yet there I found myself being transformed into a deranged individual by a single conversation with an unnerving woman. A woman who had successfully terrorized those under her supposed care. And I had become her next victim. I didn't want to let that happen. And so I stubbornly stood or sat my ground. I didn't submit to that urge, the urge to pull over at the side of the road and walk those steps. Get back in the car feeling rejuvenated and free from the darkness for only a little longer. I gripped the steering wheel firmly as the horror grew and grew in my soul. And as I came closer and closer to reaching the end of the second hour, an hour during which I hadn't taken a single step, an hour during which I had broken Tracy's sacred rules, the rules of the tall crawl which threatened to take a hold of me. And then it happened. I lost control of the car. I didn't know why or how. There had been nothing in the road, nothing to explain the force which suddenly swept the vehicle into a tornado twirl. My daughter and I were screaming as the world beyond the windshield blurred, as the environment whizzed past the glass and our car started spinning across the road, almost as if aquaplaning despite it being the driest evening imaginable. There had been no natural cause for the car's sudden veering off the road. After a moment which felt eternal, there came only blackness. When I awoke, the world was upside down and revealed by the flashing lights of a not-so-distant emergency vehicle, an ambulance clinging to the grass beyond the shattered windscreen. The green blades formed the ceiling of the world and the black sky formed its bottomless floor. There was a tree ahead casting its long and impossibly black shade over our wrecked and overturned vehicle. A tree that felt not only upside down but backwards. That word entered my brain in a voice, not intrusive but real. Perhaps the realest voice that I've ever heard, realer than my own. It sounded clearly as if spoken by lips hiding within the recesses of my skull, and it terrified me beyond words when it whispered, "And don't walk in the shade of a backwards tree." And I felt it, that third rule, felt it stronger than anything I've ever felt before. It was the consequence for disobeying the tall crawl's rule of walking 11 steps per hour, but not the only consequence. As hands pulled my form out of the car, my eyes started to adjust to the world, and through the headache and the tears, my brain finally started to process the girl being carried to the ambulance. "Claire!" I screamed as my limp body was hoisted onto another stretcher. "Let's go! Get them both into the vehicle and get moving." The paramedic yelled. It was a long road to recovery, not physically but mentally. All things considered, my injuries weren't too bad. I was alive, and it could have been far worse. I made it out of a hospital bed within a week, having suffered a broken ankle, minor internal bleeding, and a few cuts and bruises. I simply had to wear a cast and use crutches for the next couple of months. My beautiful daughter, on the other hand, had barely survived the crash. A punctured lung, 2 broken legs, a broken arm, and deep lacerations across her body. Those were the prices that she paid for my recklessness, my refusal to obey the tall crawl. And Tracy had warned me as such, warned me that should I not follow the rules of the entity which was passed on to me that evening, that I would face terrible and dreadful consequences, that something bad would happen not only to me, but to someone that I loved, perhaps to everyone I loved. I eyed my wife and other daughter in fear, praying that they would be spared for my carelessness. I wept by Claire's hospital bed for weeks until she was finally released in early February, by which point I was nearly out of the foot cast. Of course, in the weeks leading up to that moment, so much had changed. I had changed, had become better. You see, I understood the warning, understood that the car crash had been an omen, that I hadn't imagined the black cloud hanging over me, hadn't imagined the horrifying voice in my head, or the figure slinking out from behind the tree. The other horror that I had remembered in time from the car accident. The memory had come back to me as I was lying in a hospital bed one night. I dreamt both during the day and the night of the crash, replayed it over and over and over. And this one night I recalled something that I had either forgotten or pushed out of my conscious thoughts. As I had been dangling from the driver's seat upside down, eyeing that strange, topsy-turvy tree ahead, a shape had emerged from the blackness, illuminated by the glowing light of the ambulance. It had been the tall shadow of a man, or something vaguely resembling a man, with limbs elongated beyond anything earthly, anything human. But it was real and it had many forms. And when it had disappeared from view, it had crawled up the tree, crawled into the blackness of the night sky below from my upside-down view. The nightmare didn't stop there, of course. The tall crawl would return to me again and again, whether I were to follow his rules or not. It seemed I had no escape from him. Sometimes he would appear as a figure. Sometimes he was a black cloud hanging over a room, or he was a set of eyes watching from a coat hanging on a stand, eyes that would have gone once the light had turned on. But he was always watching, and he would always know whether I would follow his rules or not. Completing 11 steps per hour by far was the most taxing of them. Every night's sleep was disrupted by my need to walk those steps, which was painful on a broken ankle, but not as painful as the alternative. And of course, my wife frowned at my hourly phone alarm. I hooked it up to Bluetooth headphones, but it often disrupted her sleep whenever I would get up during the night to pace the room, considering I would do it 8 times per night. As for the third rule regarding the backwards tree, I thought little of it at first. In truth, it was so nonsensical that I thought I would never have to consider it at all, that the tall crawl had given me the easiest rule in the world to follow, for there is no such thing as a backwards tree. It made no sense to me until that particular day in February, when I was driving Claire and the rest of the family home from the hospital. I felt it in the air, as I always do whenever he's around. Well, he's always around, of course. The tall crawl never leaves. But sometimes, as I said before, he's more present than others. Sometimes he comes up to the surface, showing himself as that dark cloud or that figure in the distance. And I felt it in the air, felt the surprisingly sunny February morning take a dark turn as we followed that country road. We took a bend sharply and my eyes began to water as I clocked the shade spreading over our lane, coming from a proud oak tree standing on the left-hand side of the road. There was something wrong with its bark, with its angle, with its everything. It was backwards. And I know that makes no sense, for there's no such thing as a backwards tree. But that was why I knew not to ignore the sign, not to make the error of disobeying the tall crawl again. I didn't dismiss the feeling this time, didn't dismiss the very real voice in my head. I screamed and swerved to the right, entering the lane of oncoming traffic, and everybody in the car screamed as we danced around the outer edge of the tree's abnormally long shade, a shade which seemed to be crawling further across the road, almost grazing the tires of our car. But thankfully we made it past, and I only swerved back into our lane once I had skirted entirely around the shadow. We missed an approaching vehicle by plenty of seconds, but not enough to avoid understandable screams of terror from my wife and daughters. "What are you doing? You nearly killed us all." There was a hedgehog in our lane. I had to swerve to avoid it. I lied on the spot, still collecting my breath, which I hoped would explain the undeniable hesitation that had been in my voice as I had come up with the lie. "I didn't see a hedgehog," my younger daughter Odette scoffed. She swiveled around in her seat to look out of the rear window. "I only..." But then the angry and animated girl stopped talking. Her sentence trailed off as she clocked something, and I clocked it too. Something inexplicable on the road behind us. The shadow of the backwards tree was retreating, pulling back across the lane in the grass, pulling back into the bark of the grand oak, which was readjusting its bark and adopting more of a natural and normal appearance, as if readying itself, as if returning to its slumber so as to lie in wait for another day, waiting for another chance to catch me off guard, to try to get me to break its rule. But that wasn't what terrified me. It was Odette. If my daughter had also seen the shadow crawl and the tree bark shift, that meant that I had to accept the truth that I had been avoiding for months. None of this is in my head, I told my psychiatrist, Dr. Rosetta, at our weekly appointment. It's all real. Because you suffered a car accident as a form of punishment for disobeying this woman's rule, she had asked. I shook my head. No, I know you call that confirmation bias. I know that you say bad things will always happen, and I'm just trying to draw connections between coincidences. No, I know this is real now because my daughter saw what I saw. The doctor nodded, seeming unconvinced. Right, the shadow and the tree bark. Well, I'm not here to reassure you. You may well be right. Maybe something is out there to get you. Of course, you took your daughter home in the early hours of the morning while the sun was rising. Shadows move as the day progresses. Not like this, I whispered, gulping deeply. And that doesn't explain the figure that I saw after the car crash. The tall crawl, the doctor said. And he's the one who makes the rules, right? Not Tracy, the care worker who upset you. Look, I don't expect you to understand. It's real, it's a fear unlike anything that you've ever felt before. Well, I don't doubt that, and I don't doubt that it feels real. But I've heard those exact words from patients before. I think that you have an obsessive-compulsive disorder. I groaned. No, I read all about that when I was researching my own symptoms earlier in this mental health crisis, as you like to call it. But it's not OCD. It's not just an anxiety disorder. When I don't follow the rules, bad things actually do happen. The doctor smiled as if it were a gotcha moment. Precisely. For people with your mental illness, the fear feels real. The rules you follow feel important. The idea that something bad will happen should you not follow them feels like an inescapable fact of the universe itself. That's part and parcel of the disorder, Mr. Roberts. You're suffering from magical thinking and... But I told you that I've never had any mental health problems, I interrupted. Why now, as a middle-aged man, would I spontaneously develop this disorder? Aren't people born with it? Well, research suggests a genetic link, yes, but that doesn't mean OCD reveals itself in all sufferers during their early years of life. Your situation may be uncommon, but it's not impossible for symptoms to present themselves in a person's later years. It's not OCD, I whispered, shaking my head once again. Bad things happen when I don't do as the tall crawl asks. Well, let's test that. We've been sitting here and talking for 40 minutes now. I see that you're getting very fidgety. I assume that's because you haven't completed your 11 steps yet, correct? I gulped, sensing where this was going. I'm not going to do it, I said, standing up. Just wait a second. Please, don't do the 11 steps. I'm just gonna do a quick circuit around the room. Once I've done as it bids, I'll be safe and my loved ones will be okay. Then I'll sit down again. Just 20 more minutes, the doctor pleaded. Nothing bad will happen, I promise. Just give me 20 minutes and I'll prove that it's all in your head. What do you say? No, I said. As I took my first step, the doctor rose to her feet. Please, just listen to me. Nothing bad is going to happen. You'll see that this is all just in your head. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to take a few steps, but I wanted the doctor to be right. I wanted so desperately for this to be over. So I nodded and we sat. She talked about the weather and I nodded absent-mindedly, but my eyes and attention belonged to the clock hanging on the wall. The minutes ticked closer and closer as we approached 5 o'clock in the evening, the end of our session. The end of a whole hour since I had taken 11 steps. I felt my head pound, felt the darkness fill the room again. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to tell myself, it's all in my head, it's all in my head, it's all in my head. And then that minute hand clicked into place on the 12 at the top of the analog clock. My doctor let out a happy sound while munching away on her sandwich. You see, we made it to 5 o'clock, 1 hour without walking 11 steps. And we've reached the end of our session, Mr. Roberts. And what a wonderful place to stop because nothing bad. Midway through her sentence, the doctor spluttered and I opened my eyes, opened them wide, opened my mouth wider as I started to scream. The woman was clawing her fingers against her neck and she opened her lips to croak out pleading words. But all that came was blood filling her mouth and trickling down her chin. I yelled for help and the secretary dashed into the room and she screamed while I dialed 911, and the ambulance arrived within 7 minutes. It was incredibly quick, and the paramedics did all they could, but it was too late for her. A shard of glass was the culprit. How it had wound up in the woman's sandwich, I didn't know. But I know that as the woman's body was taken away on the stretcher, reminding me of my own daughter following the car crash months before, I saw her eyes move. A dead woman's eyes rotated in their sockets and twisted to look at me. And they weren't her own. In fact, I had seen them before in the face of that terrifying care worker. The eyes of the tall crawl. And that brings me to the horror of the present day. Not knowing where to go or what to do, I have to find a way to break free from this curse without incurring the wrath of this demon. You see, I have not given up, not yet. Even with the darkness creeping closer and closer, even with the threat of that thing taking control, stealing my soul. I think despite how horribly things went for her, my doctor may have been right. Not about me having a mental illness, but about me needing to challenge the tall crawl, needing to beat it. I just have to be smarter about doing so. After all, whenever I disobey its rules, I do feel stronger and weaker at the same time. I'm not sure how that's possible, but it's the key and I'm certain of it. I plan to live my life. I'm taking my family on a road trip where I hope to clear my head. While we're out there, I'm going to tell them what's been happening, and I know they'll be able to help me. I hope this story will help someone else out there, someone facing the tall crawl, someone who, like me, can feel it's burrowing more and more deeply into the back of his or her mind as time presses onwards. My name is Cedric Roberts, and I don't have obsessive-compulsive disorder. I have a curse, but I'm going to defeat it. Today's episode is sponsored by Ali. If your dog could talk, they would warn you about what's lurking in their bowl. Mass-produced kibble isn't just unappetizing, it could be a crime against canine health. Mysterious byproducts, unpronounceable preservatives, and who knows what fillers. Sounds more like evidence from a crime scene than dinner. Molly is here to crack the case on pet nutrition with fresh, human-grade meals made with the highest quality ingredients. No mystery meats or artificial junk. Just real, minimally processed food made in US kitchens. Ali makes it super easy to get started. Just fill out their 30-second quiz and they'll create a customized meal plan based on your pup's weight, activity level, and other health info, along with recommending recipes and portion sizes. For any first-timers, Ali will send out your pup's first box with 2 weeks worth of meals and a guide on how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Plus, Ali is the only fresh dog food that comes with unlimited routine health screenings, so you can get your pup on track to living their healthiest and happiest life. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ali.com/MrCreeps. Tell them all about your dog and use code MrCreeps to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/MrCreeps and enter code MrCreeps to get 60% off your first box. I don't even know where to start here. If you've managed to intercept this, then odds are that you're in for a bad time. If you're one of the ones back home who got me into this mess, then I hope you rot. Either way, I'm trying to send this out to as many people as possible. At the very least, you deserve a little warning of what's to come. From the top, my name is Pierce Valens. For the past 7 years now, I believe, I've honestly lost track of time. Anyway, I've been stationed on the moon. I'm a geologist called up here to help with a mining operation after some unknown minerals were found. Unfortunately, I'm the last person alive up here now, and I don't see that lasting too much longer. So consider this my last will and testament. I ain't getting out of here, and there's no way that the rod is getting out of here either. And guess if I have any solace, it's that the bigwigs who were up here bit it first. Okay, none of this is going to make sense unless we start from the beginning. The big thing you need to know is that the space race ended and became more of a space marathon. It wasn't about who finished first. It was about getting there and setting up your territory to see what you could find. The states ended up working together with other countries. China, the former Soviets, India. Basically anybody who could pop a rocket into orbit got an invitation. Hooray, world unity, right? Now when it comes to this, everyone is up here working together, but they're about to end the entirety of humanity through their combined efforts. All their resources went into building a nice little outpost up here on the moon, though I'm not sure what the original purpose of it was. Eventually, probably around, 6 years or so ago from the briefing that I got, they started mining. Initially, it started out as just a, let's find out what's under the surface type of thing. Innocent enough, right? Find some rare minerals and maybe change how things operate on Earth. Except the mining is what got us into this stupid situation. About 3 years ago was when they found the Great Table, That's the technical term for it anyway. Apparently, it was during one of the regular mining operations. Workers tunneling under the surface of the moon. Seems like a fantastic idea, right? Well, they ended up breaking through into this huge hollow antechamber. A big discovery, right? Turns out, Hollow Moon was the least of our conspiracy-addled worries. This place was big, located pretty close to the center of the satellite, but it didn't match up. The dimensions of the place made no sense when compared to our measurements of the moon itself. When placed in comparison to the surface area, our tunnels and everything else, it's like it took up far more room than was physically possible. Yet nothing was different if you were looking down from the surface. That threw everybody for one heck of a loop, naturally. I was already here for geological surveys, testing out samples that some of the excavation crew brought back, and seeing what they compared to back on Earth. Nothing too crazy, and the pay was good at the start, especially for how easy the work was. Most of the materials found up here were just different forms of basalt, silicon, the occasional deposit of iron, all stuff that we've seen before. I can still remember watching the live feed when they found the chamber. We had excavated down probably 300 miles below the surface of Earth's lunar body. As far as what they were trying to find, I don't know. Maybe they were hoping for water or some new energy source. Instead, we found a vast, empty cavern that steadily kept sloping downward. I honestly was surprised that we didn't hit the top of it and fall through. Instead, crashing through almost perfectly perpendicular to the floor of it. They set up an elevator to get more of us down there before long, and let me tell you, just stepping into that cavern almost broke my brain. You see, one thing the moon has going for it is the lack of light pollution. Set up at the right spot on the base and you could see stars you never thought existed. Entire galaxies were visible far off, almost to the naked eye if you looked hard enough. One of the most beautiful sights that I've ever seen, and you could catch it from almost anywhere on the surface. In here though, complete darkness. It was a void, even with our strongest lights set up. Couldn't see the top of the place, no ceiling above, just the dark absence of anything. It was the first time that I had seen complete darkness in a while, and something about it was just primal. Everything in me told me to run the moment that I stepped down there. We eventually set up a full base camp and started exploring the chamber. We never found an end to it. The entire thing just stretched on forever, even after we had estimated 600 miles covered. There's no way that we wouldn't find some end around there with the dimensions of the moon. I fully expected to come across a massive cavern wall at any point, ready to crack through to the surface on the other side, or at least into something. But no, we just kept moving, until we found the Great Table. I wasn't on the mission that found the first bit of rot. I did see that team when they got brought back through our base camp though. The videos they had. God, it was like a bad movie. The pale lights of their suits were lighting solid rock in every direction. The darkness beyond encroaching like it was trying to take the team. Eventually though, the color of the rock changed. It was so gradual that you would hardly notice it at first. Just the lightest hint of dark creeping into the gray rock. Eventually though, it started clustering, darkening the gray to a dark charcoal color. And eventually it took over so fully, such a dark black, that it mixed into the abyss around them, making ground near indistinguishable from the void. Even with a more high-powered light, it still looked like the team was just floating in space, likely to fall into the ground at any moment. Every so often there would be a crack in the floor, a deep green breaking through the black. I can't really blame the team for being hesitant to check it, but eventually one of them noticed that the cracks were pulsating. One finally suggested that he believed it was glowing, and that was where the first mistake was made. The 5 members of the team gathered close, each putting a hand on another before turning off their lights, one by one down the line. As the darkness began closing in with each one deigniting, the green glow of the cracks became more defined. They were indeed pulsating, the green ebbing and flowing from one direction as it went in waves. The team took a moment to orient themselves, keeping their lights off while turning to face the direction the pulse was originating from. The last one in line tripped in the shuffle, losing his hand on the one in front of him. There was a brief shout, terror filling his voice, and then it was gone. His camera feed blinked out with a small burst of glitched pixels. The rest of the team turned their lights on immediately, shouting for him to do the same and stay close. Their cameras panned in every direction, desperately searching for their friend there just moments before. But there was nothing, just the cracks still pulsating a faint green against their pale lights. The 5th member of their party was gone, nowhere in sight. The fear in their faces as the suit cams kept shaking, everyone desperately turning to try and find their teammate. It's something that I've never been able to shake. That was 4 years ago now, and looking back, that was our sign to get the heck out of there. The team followed their line back after a while, making it back to base camp after a couple of days. None of them were normal though. Everyone began to steadily decline, their health beginning to crash out, starting with intense bouts of insomnia. By the time they were brought back through my segment of the base, it was like seeing corpses get walked through. They couldn't be taken out of their suits at this point due to how frail they were, worrying that they could break a limb in the process of getting them out or back in for transport. They were just wasting away in there. By the time they got back to the surface, they were practically soup in there, so decomposed their bodies just melted within hours. I don't know if it was the quick rise back to the surface, maybe a change in atmospheric pressure, I don't know. But the reports that we got back were that they had to just dispose of the suits themselves, because they were, well, they were dead and gone. Unfortunately, however, they disposed of the suit, it wasn't enough. Despite the rotting corpses sloshing around inside the atmospheric suits. God, it makes me gag just thinking about it. The footage that we got up from here a couple of days later was something even more disturbing than the fear that I had seen on their faces just days before. They sent us these security tapes. I guess that in absence of any real idea of what to do with their festering bodies in those suits, they were just put in a cold storage in hopes of, I don't know, stalling any further putrefaction. They were in a deep freezer that was serving as a makeshift morgue, suits still on and the gases inside causing them to stay rigid and nearly laying on the tables. God, the poor guy that had to move them, Through the cameras, you could see little droplets on the visors of the suits from what they were now. Anyways, it was maybe 12 hours, not that long after they were put in there. One of the 4 just gets up, starts walking around like not a thing happened. The other 3 followed not long after, suits getting up and walking around the small cold storage area. Eventually, they started banging on the door, and I swear that we could hear screams over the recording, begging to be let out, wailing in pain and misery. The first guy that answered their cries, well, he might have been the luckiest of us. Soon as the door opened, he was grabbed, 1 suit to each of his limbs, and they just pulled. Kept pulling even after he came apart. Another guard came in once he had heard those screams, started shooting at the whole group of them. When it busted through the suits, it was like they deflated. Only a decaying skeleton and dissolved flesh left inside. I don't know if maybe their souls couldn't escape the suits. I honestly don't know. Maybe the pressure release just made it harder for them to move with the suits on. I don't know, I'm just a guy who studies rocks. They didn't move much more after that, though not for lack of trying. Just couldn't get far in their incredibly messed up state. The guy that they tore apart was dead though, dead for real, and good for him. For some messed up reason, they kept sending people to explore the cavern even after all that. A sunk cost fallacy, I guess. Might as well keep exploring when you've already put this much money into it. Lo and behold, we find the great table a few miles further than where they left. The epicenter of those cracks, the pulsating light, it was huge. This massive slab of rock in the middle of nothing. That same dark black as the surrounding stone, so dark that one of our guys ran into it. For a moment they thought it was a wall, but eventually realized that they could go around it. All told, it took maybe half a day to circumnavigate the entire thing, and we're not entirely sure how tall it was. The cracks ended underneath it though, the pulsating green much more intense here than before. Every wave of light through it made it look like the table was breathing. Look, I want to preface all of this with, I don't know who's handing down orders for all that we're doing up here. They gave the direction though, and we had no choice but to follow. A camp was set up next to the great table, and they tried to take a sample of the rock that it was made of. Except they couldn't. Nothing could cut through it, even the most advanced mining tools that we brought up here. I mean, they used everything, drills, diamond saws, plasma. Nothing could even get a scratch on the thing. Eventually, somebody tried to examine it right then and there, but it was just too much to get any kind of reading on it. Nothing that we had on Earth or the moon so far lined up with whatever this element was. We spent months working on it, with the team by the table doing what they could to gather a sample. At some point about a year and a half ago, whoever was up top sent down the order to try a controlled demolition. They set up about 2 miles away from the main table camp, setting up concussive charges to break through the base. Look, we all had our concerns that we voiced. They fell on deaf ears though, nobody hearing our cries for some kind of, I don't know, patience. Some sort of sense when it came to busting through this unknown rock with explosives. Instead, we were told that if the crew at the table didn't do it, they would be replaced with somebody that would. The rest of us were told that we were equally replaceable, and unfortunately that was that. I remember watching the live feed when they broke through. All of us gathered around to see if this would either be completely useless or the start of our demise. Everyone knew, I think, that what we were doing was going to be nothing but bad for us. I guess somebody had profit on the line though, so it was either we go along with it or go back home with nothing in hand. Most of us chose to keep our livelihood at the time. Anyway, a few controlled explosives were put in at the base of the great table. Everyone cleared out to make room for the blast and off it went. When the smoke had finally cleared, all that it made was the smallest crack in the center, right where it connected to the ground. The crack made its way up the wall of the great table, jagged and thin and just a hairline fracture practically. Through it though was that same faint green glow. Where the table met the floor of the cavern also began to crack, spreading right along the corner and separating from the rock floor. We broke the table open only a hair, and that was enough. The crew who stepped toward the crack to inspect it, we still don't really know what happened to them. From the brief seconds that we caught on camera, it looked like they were sucked through, suits folding in on themselves with the people still inside as they were being absorbed into the cracks. They barely had time to scream, basically being compressed into nothingness the moment that they stepped close to the thing. It was like a black hole contained to the 5-foot radius of the table. We weren't able to see what was on the other side either, suits getting their cameras crushed right along with their inhabitants. Needless to say, they didn't send anybody else too close after that. Not that it really mattered, because things started to go on a steady decline from there. The rot had started to take over. Slowly at first, corruption spreading from the cracks at the great table. The physical signs of it were relatively subtle the closer that you are to the table, but the mental toll that it takes. People close to the base camp started breaking down, changing mentally and physically. Their bodies atrophied, sometimes in days and sometimes weeks, and their minds started to go right along with their bodies. Long losses of memory, rambling, and sudden violent outbursts. There wasn't any kind of real pattern to how people got sick. It seemingly picked and chose at random, settling in with relative subtlety in the beginning. The first signs of rot were degradation of appetite, loss of sleep, and a general irritability. That started things on the course for chaos already, leading to plenty of workers assigned to the grade table camp to develop a resentment and paranoia of their fellows. By the time that they began exhibiting physical signs, they were often delusional and violent, with an incredible disregard for the safety of themselves and others. Isolated incidents of violence and attacks became more frequent as more advanced in their infection of rot. As their mental state digressed, most would turn to attacking their fellow workers, believing that it would slow their decay. Whether that was true or not is a whole other issue, but they seemed to believe that the more gruesome the kill, the more that it would save them from the hell that they were experiencing. The bodies began to stack up, and gruesomely too. They would practically slice up others and turn them into makeshift altars to some deity. That's actually how we ended up with the name Rot, believe it or not. Many of them would whisper about feeding the rot as some sort of appeasement to it, and giving it a non-resistant body to begin decaying further. They tended to only attack those that were healthier, in turn, so things only began to devolve faster. Starting out, they were able to restrain the few that were in this advanced state of rot, but eventually these sick outnumbered the healthy, or those still living at least. And keep in mind that I'm not an expert in how all of this went down near the Great Table Camp, because most of this was just received through survivor reports when they made it to the nearby camps. They sent word back through and it was pretty much over then and there. All of us collectively put in our resignation, storming back to the main outpost above, and demanding to be sent home before this went any further. Maybe that was our own stupid thinking looking back, but we should have known that we weren't getting out of here. They stopped any kind of transport immediately, nobody in, nobody out, and they locked us all down. For a few days, we forgot all about the chaos below the surface as things went to hell up top. Everyone rebelling and turning to violence in light of their likely impending death. Some people lost it. Others managed to pull their stuff together. Either way, none of us had very long. I ended up going back to the surface. Camps down below, well, they were bad. Most of them fell to infighting within a couple of weeks. Those that didn't to tend with the rot as it spread further from the Great Table. The dark black color of the rock crept further and further out from it. A message that we had received from the nearest camp to the Great Table said that it reached them about a week after all things went bad. 6 months passed and the entire chamber was a dark, rotting black rock, all the way to the elevator shaft that I was originally stationed at. Needless to say, the lift was shut down, so it's a good thing that I had already moved up, though it feels like I was just delaying the inevitable at that point. The real problems began not long after everybody fled to the surface. We shut off the lift and basically made our little security force up top that were constantly on watch for any of the rot, or those corrupted with it trying to make their way up. I got put on the mind-numbing job of watching camera monitors. Honestly, seeing the monitor room for the first time, it made me feel like we were being experimented on, observed. Cameras were everywhere up here and down below, capturing every small movement that we made. Not sure who was this invested in watching them all before I came along, but for me it became watching our death slowly make its way to us. Everywhere down there was taken at this point. The cracks had spread further, trailing along with the darkness that set into the rock from the Great Table. As they spread though, it was like the light in them became brighter, more powerful as it corrupted more and more of the planet. Those poor idiots that remained down there. Well, the ones that were living didn't stay that way for now. The rot was corrupting people at a much faster rate the further that they were from the Great Table. It's like the symptoms were dialed up to 11 as distance grew from the initial cracks, leading to a more spontaneous burst in violence before rotting away, trapped as muscles atrophied and left decaying corpses behind. Some were collapsed around the chamber, still in Atmos suits as they desperately tried to find some other form of shelter before they were taken. Others were in the pop-up habitats that we had scattered through the camps down there, right in full 4K glory on the cameras, rotting away as their brains remained fully aware of what happened around them. Some didn't get the mental psychosis. I think that was the worst part to see. There was no hint of violence, malice, or anything when they spoke, but you could see their bodies beginning to break down. I watched one poor man overnight he began to go downhill, said that his muscles ached, his head hurt as well, and when he tried to stand up, his bones were so brittle that his legs simply broke. He was stranded there as the rest of him biologically degraded over the next few hours, a waxy look creeping into his face before his skin began flaking off, revealing a skull with eyeballs beginning to sag from it. I made it a point to start flipping away from his camera when it came up in the rotation because he ended up staring straight into me, almost right through the camera and into my soul. It still gives me shivers when I think about it, even after he moved later on. I watched the cracks reach all the way to the lift before they stopped spreading completely. We honestly thought that we were saved. The cracks weren't an issue anymore. We had a couple of months where we even started deluding ourselves into thinking that we might get out of here. A couple of the guys had been sending radio signals back to Earth, trying to get in contact with somebody who could tell people about us. We were finally getting through to someone that was taking us seriously, but that was all for nothing, I guess. The bloom began to take hold a few months ago. I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing reality at first, or if I was finally losing my mind. I figured the stress of everything finally caught up, or worse, that the rot might finally have found a way up there to take me out. It took me a few minutes to reconcile that I wasn't just losing my mind up here. I was going through the cameras one day, just going monitor by monitor, flipping through whatever feeds were still coming from down there, and everything changed. It was that same atrophied man, the one that broke his legs trying to get up and was forced to sit there, feeling his body decay around him. The skeleton was partially broken down by this point, part of a decaying eye still dangling from the socket, as whatever internal organs he had left continued to rot away inside him. I had noticed there was a point of slower decay, usually after the skin had sloughed off, and they just remained there as putrid frames, skeletal forms barely holding the remaining organs in as they rotted. I think it was so odd that it just didn't compute at first, but right behind that dangling eyeball was a blooming and bright blue flower. I don't know how long I stared at it, only to flip away and flip right back, convinced that it was just me losing my mind. But no, I started noticing it in other areas too as I flipped through monitors. There were flowers blooming, deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon. Green light pulsing through the cracks in the floor around them, as they blossomed into beautiful colors on all the rotting corpses. Those closest to the Great Table were the first to undergo the full process. Before long, their bodies were covered. An entire bouquet of blues, yellows, reds, pinks, greens, purples. So many beautiful and vivid colors that I've never heard a name for, bursting forth on these decayed horror mannequins. A breathtaking sight. The vines of the flowers blooming on them would wind their way around their skeletal remains, covering bone and making them into whole new beings. And then they started to move again. Slow at first, like they were just learning to propel themselves. But before long, the dead began to get up and walk once more. At the great table, even those that had been murdered and offered up as sacrifices to the rot began to be overcome by the bloom, leading to a whole second life as vine overtook rotten veins and muscles, moving them like puppets, all toward us. Their numbers grew with those further from the great table blooming in turn at a more rapid rate, before joining the horde of floral zombies moving ever closer to the left. I alerted the others as soon as the bloom had started, so everyone was aware of what was happening. There were probably only 30 of us left, with more than 100 down below making their way toward us for a reason that we have yet to know. One of our guys dropped the lift before they were able to reach it, cutting the cables so that there was no way for them to bring it back up. On one monitor, I watched the crash, flames briefly coming through before they were snuffed out by the lack of atmosphere. I honestly wonder if that only gave them a more precise idea of where we were. The cracks in the ground had spread all the way there already, and the green light pulsated from them in the monitors, illuminating the field of rotten flowers as they moved ever closer to the last barrier between us and them. It did no good. They broke right through, inhuman strength pulling the shaft open despite the lift wreckage in the way. I don't have any cameras inside the lift, so I don't know how they did it, but they climbed up through mile after mile like it was nothing. And before we knew it up here, flowers were blooming right through the cracks in the door on the left. Swear that this was what it felt like to see the last march of the Ents from the opposing side, knowing that you were about to get murdered by a plant. I locked myself off in the monitor room. I know it sounds cowardly, but what the heck was my choice otherwise? I would have let anybody in if they asked and were still alive, but well, it didn't take very long for things to go bad. I had a front row view for the carnage, and it was bad. The bloom-filled corpses stormed in through the lift gates, overpowering it and leaving an entirely new ecosystem in their wake. Some of the guys tried to fight them off, some using fire to try and take them down, others resorting to weapons that they cobbled together. It was no use. The moment that a bloom saw somebody that wasn't infected yet, they would grab them, no escape possible. I saw one guy who got caught right outside of the main gates get picked up by 3 of the bloomed, each one stabbing into him with thick green vines. From there, it's like they didn't drain them. It was more like they cultivated the bodies that they picked up. Maybe the vines transferred seeds or spores or something, but the poor guys on the receiving end got the unfortunate privilege of skipping the rot phase entirely. They didn't even have the vines out of that first guy when the blooms started taking him over. I don't know if it's different because the bodies are more fresh, maybe more nutrients to pull from. Who knows, to be honest. In his case, though, the flowers were larger and more ravenous than the ones on the previous rot victims. They were still vivid colors, but the flowers themselves sprouted larger, almost overtaking portions of the poor guy's body completely as they bloomed outward. The guy fell to the ground, twitching for only a moment before getting up and making his way toward former allies, the huge blossoms now erupting from his body and devouring those that he could get a hold of. I always loved Monet paintings, and this, one of the flowers blooming on this guy, reminded me of a water lily. Huge petals all blossoming out from the center. Floating on a pond they would have been magnificent, but here I saw them quickly become drenched in blood as they tore into other humans, the petal edges shredding anything they came into contact with. Before long, blood was flying everywhere as the bloom overtook even more healthy humans, all being propagated one by one as these zombies made their way forward. As the droplets of crimson covered the petals, though, they were just as quickly drank by the flora, seemingly driving it toward more. All I could really do was hide here in the monitor room. There was no hope for anything out there. The monitors told me the entire story of what I had waiting for me. The bloom from down below, they started spreading through the main base up here, the rot and corruption following them as they went. I saw darkness spread through the white plastic and steel that we used as building materials in the base, slowly creeping up from the lift shaft. It felt like an entirety that I'd been in here, trying not to make any noise or call attention to myself, unless some of the bloomed end up finding me. The rod is going to reach me first at this rate though. Everything is turning black, slowly breaking down in decay as it goes. I can see rust growing on some of the exposed steel and spots around the base. High quality cameras keeping me hyper aware of just how screwed I am. No matter what it comes up against, organic or not, this decay just spreads, corrupting anything it comes into contact with. The first crack appeared up here yesterday, right in the transport hall leading to the lift gate, where there was still dark blood staining the blackened walls from only days ago when the bloom had broke in. The pulsing green light was visible in the elevator shaft before it even got up here, an ominous glow cutting through the corrupted darkness. I swear that it's breathing, pulsing, feeling for any life out there that it can still take root in. Me. I'm running out of food in here. I know that I'm the last living person on the moon too. Watching these monitors, I got to see everybody meet their demise. The last holdout was a guy named Apollo, a good guy who worked in the cafeteria and made some of the best adobo chicken that I had ever had in my life. I don't know if he forgot about them or what, but I saw him running from the bloom a few days ago, desperately trying to live despite all odds. He found the cold storage room, the same one where the initial rot victims had been kept, and tore apart another guy. Guess he didn't remember that after everything else that happened though, because the moment he opened that door, he was done for. 4 Atmos suits all bursting with flowers and greenery like a mobile terrarium took him immediately. Vines forced their way through his skin, along his back and his stomach, one going down his throat despite his attempts to fight back, and began to bloom immediately. He was a shade of purple that popped against the dark rot infecting the base, beautiful in the decay. So here I am, all alone orbiting the Earth, with something that would easily destroy the world slowly making its way toward me. The green cracks are spreading further in, and even though I know I'm alone, I swear that I can hear people calling me. Whatever it is, it knows my name too. It's all I can hear when I close my eyes. There are whispers in my ears telling me to open the door. Not like it's stopping the rot from coming through anyway. All this talking has worn me out. I'm going to try to get some sleep, hopefully without any of those flowery terrors coming in after me. I don't know how long I was asleep for. The rot is outside though, slowly seeping its way through the cracks in the door. There's this bad feeling that I've got, telling me that the moment it spreads far enough to touch where I am, everything is going to know about me. I'm terrified that all of them are going to come for me, tearing me apart and planting those seeds or whatever they are in me. This is going to sound suicidal because it definitely is. I guess I feel some sense of duty though, being the last one alive up here and all. There are people back on Earth living their lives down below, unaware of anything going on here. The rot, the bloom, all of this coming from under the Great Table. They never need to find out about it down there. Now I've made up my mind. Command is down the hallway to my left, maybe a 70-meter dash if I have a clear shot. I don't know if there is a self-destruct button in there, but I do know that there are direct controls for the ventilation and heating system. My plan is going to involve turning that on, closing off the oxygen scrubber system, and setting it to circulate the existing air in here and nothing else. And then I'm going to the shop. There should be a direct access to it from under the command room, and it takes up most of the lower floor of the base before getting down into the lift area. I'm lighting up every flammable material that I find in here and turning every nozzle wide open. The floor a few feet away from me is becoming dark, the corruption and rot getting even closer. That same whisper kept calling my name even louder now. A scream rings out from down the hallway, making me shrink back into my chair. No putting it off. I got up and ran, bursting through the door and into the hallway with abandon. I could already hear something scraping across the floor from the opposite direction that I was running, and another guttural scream burst through the still air as I ran. Command is in sight down the hallway, I just have to push a little bit harder. A bloom burst through the wall ahead, arms flailing as it came barreling toward me, arms reaching wide as it ran. I made the best effort I could, squeezing against the wall and sliding under its arms, but one of the petals still sliced my shoulder. Oh God, it hurts. I could never tell over the monitors, but up close, these petals have thousands of small spines on them, so fine that they were practically invisible. They stuck in the wound, stinging me further even after it had sliced through. I flipped myself into the command door just as the thing began to turn back toward me, slamming the heavy steel in its face and hitting the pneumatic lock. That would buy me a second. I practically fell on the desk, just trying to get on the computer. Blood was already soaking through my clothes below the wound, dripping down my sleeve onto my arm. I feel woozy, but I can't just stop now. Okay, check the computer. There. Vent controls were one of the first things under the maintenance menu, thank God. I didn't quite think it through, though. Of course, there was no way to disconnect from the oxygen scrubber. God, was that rot messing with my brain? Okay, plan B. Got it. There's an option to set the oxygen levels of the air inside the base, just in case anybody needed help adjusting to the atmosphere, I guess. Normally, we sit around Earth levels, a solid 20 to 25% oxygen in the atmosphere blowing through here. How high will this thing let me take it? Holy crap, I can up the oxygen levels to 50%. 75 if I can get the emergency override code. Maybe, just maybe. My God, it's my lucky day. Humanity's lucky day even. The override code was scrawled on a sticky note sitting right there on the desk. The bloom was still outside, banging on the door trying to get through. I set the levels, hearing the ventilation kick in as soon as I started turning it up. Oxygen is incredibly flammable, so just a little time and an accelerant and we should be good to go. A vine burst through the door, stretching far into the room before it stopped, and began feeling around to try and find me. Time to get out of here. God, my shoulder hurts though. I really shouldn't have just looked at it either. There were small flowers beginning to bloom in the wound, where the little fibers from the petal were sticking. They were making their way further into my flesh, small sprouts beginning to pop up in vivid color. I felt my stomach turn. No, keep going, keep moving. I practically throw myself down the hatch, dropping in and falling onto a workbench nearby. I can see the tank, pump hanging on a hook next to it. Limping my way over, I twist the nozzle, opening it wide and letting gas spray around the workshop area. This place has already been taken by the rot. Darkness and mold covering the floor. Countertops thick with a layer of grime as cracks begin spreading further through. That same green pulse was already showing down here. I left the hose on the floor still sputtering out gas as it went, and I made my way over to another area. The small mechanics bench had a welding setup nearby. Huge canisters of natural gas on hand to run the torches along with other dangerous stuff that we shouldn't be playing with. Now was the time to use it though. Nozzles wide open. These things were going to help cleanse this place in just a minute. Maybe it was the proximity to the rot or the wound that I'm suffering, but my mind is going. I can see them coming in, the bloomed corpses making their way through doors and vents to find me. The rot tells them where I am and they follow to claim me as a part of it. The flowers are beginning to blossom in my wound, petals opening wide to drink up any blood that may still come out when I move. There's a lighter on a nearby welding bench. That's it, the final piece of my explosive puzzle. I'm going to hold out another moment and let the gas finish filling out the atmosphere of the workshop. They're coming closer though. I don't know that I can move. My legs are feeling weak and painful, and even my arms are suddenly having trouble lifting just the lighter. Just another moment. As soon as the cam that I'm wearing stops recording, this message is due to broadcast out. I hope it finds someone. The bloom are starting to fall on me. I backed myself toward the gasoline puddle on the floor, falling in it nearly face first. They come upon me next, and I can feel a vine puncture my back right next to my spine. The colors are beautiful though, flowers blossoming through the pain. I flick the lighter hoping for the best, before consciousness slips away forever, the rot still whispering my name. My last thought is that despite all the blood that I've lost, I'm suddenly comfortably warm, at peace. Even as the petals bloom all over my body, they are cleansed in an immediate rush of flame, purifying me to ash before the rot's decay can take me over. I wonder if those back on Earth will look up to see a beautiful garden on the moon. I pray that they see a fireball instead, and though they might not know it, they'll see their own salvation in the embers. I hope. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where I should even begin with this. It's been almost a year to the day now that I experienced what I did. And in that time, I almost managed to convince myself completely that it hadn't been real. It was nothing more than your overactive imagination, Harry, I told myself day after day. One of those nightmares that seem so real. They stay with you for a long while, brought on by a traumatic experience. That's all that it was. And alongside a few stiff drinks when my own words occasionally failed to convince me, I slowly began to forget. I slowly began to let it go and return to life as normal. Until yesterday, that is. You see, I'm someone who is very much into exercising. When I quit smoking 3.5 years ago, I decided to pour all my newly freed time and energy into getting fit. Not at first, though. It was only after I noticed that I was rapidly beginning to gain weight. I stepped onto the scale one morning to find to my shock that for the first time in my life, I had gone over 200 pounds. And that decided it for me. I set about picking up a cheap pair of running shoes from Walmart, grabbing an old pair of track pants from my closet, and began walking every day that I could. At the time, I wasn't in the best financial situation, so instead of getting a gym membership, I chose to use the neighborhood that I live in for my workout. For roughly an hour or so every day, I would wind my way through the residential streets before returning home with a sheen of sweat covering my face. Slowly but surely, I felt myself begin to feel better and happier as I had lost the weight. As I did, I moved on from speed walking to full-out jogging, and unless I had something to do or I was kept inside by the weather, I never broke my routine. And more to the point, despite the fact my neighborhood had a bit of a reputation for being a little bit seedy, I always felt safe when I went out. The people that I saw were always friendly, shooting me nods and smiles as I passed, and nothing ever bothered me. That was until last spring. When I first woke up that morning, everything seemed as it always was. Nothing more than an average January day in the Pacific Northwest. According to the weather app on my phone, the temperature would stay roughly in the low 50s, perfect for an exercise. And after scarfing down a bowl of Raisin Bran Crunch, banana, and a yogurt cup, I quickly brushed my teeth and began to get ready. I dressed, slipping into my running shoes as I pulled my jacket from the closet and slid it on. Finally, I snatched my house keys from their hook, slid my driver's license into the pocket of my sweatpants, and picked up my iPod, headphones, and sunglasses from the arm of the couch before unlocking the front door. A chilly blast of air struck me as I stepped outside onto the second-story landing of my apartment building, causing me to turn my collar up to shield my neck. Unlocking the door behind me, I quickly descended the stairs and took a moment to simply breathe in and listen. The smell of the Pacific Ocean filled my nostrils, causing me to let out a contented sigh. A few blocks down, I heard a dog begin to bark from somebody's backyard, along with the droning sound of somebody mowing their lawn. As I turned to begin stretching, a loud buzzing sound came from overhead, and I tilted my head up to catch a glimpse of the orange underside of the Coast Guard helicopter as it zoomed over me. A small smile flickered across my lips as I quickly stretched, slipping the headphones over my ears and the sunglasses over my eyes. Holding the iPod up so that I could see the screen, I slid my thumb around the wheel until I found what I had been looking for, and then I clicked. A moment later, my ears were filled with the sweet, sultry sound of Diana Dors as the golden age of Hollywood actress began to sing, a kiss and a cuddle. I shot one last look behind me at my apartment in the parking lot, and then I set off. The cool air felt nice against my face as I jogged, the slight wind blowing my hair back out of my eyes as I headed for the far end of my street. My neighborhood is arranged into a sort of rectangle, dead ending at one end that presses up against the forest, and the back towards the main road. I would always alternate my path to keep things fresh, sometimes heading to the left and up Michigan Avenue to the farthest block, and sometimes the opposite direction towards Fulton Avenue. Today I had chosen the latter path. Houses and parked cars slid by me as I stared straight ahead, losing myself in the music and thudding beat of my feet on the pavement. Reaching a crest, I caught a glimpse of the estuary to my right, the sunlight reflecting off it like it was a diamond. Another smile played across my face as I headed down the other side, hopping onto the sidewalk to get out of the way of a Cadillac heading the other way. Don't forget to keep an eye out for anything, Harry, I mentally reminded myself. Reaching Fulton, I quickly spared a glance to my right, seeing cars and trucks pulling into the parking lot of the Lighthouse Market. A thought occurred to me. Maybe I'll stop in and get a Gatorade or something when I'm done. Haven't been there in a while. Turning away, I kept my pace steady, heading up the street before turning left onto South Wall. I passed by more cars and houses, noting with a slight surprise that a few were up for sale. I shook my head as I remembered hearing about some residents moving back to the more populated parts of the state. People are nuts for wanting to leave here and go back to the cities. The thought kept turning over in my head as I began to head back up the incline. But as I passed by a dirt road that stretched between Wall and the next street over, my train of thought was torn away as a huge shiver shot up my spine. I knew instantly that it hadn't come from the wind either. My collar was still turned up. And besides, it hadn't been the kind of shiver that you get from it. It was an entirely different style. The kind you get when someone is watching you. I slowed to a stop, pausing the music and pulling the headphones off my ears as I looked around. The street was deserted. I saw no one standing in the front lawns or driveways of the houses nearby. And aside from the dull thud of loud music drifting from a house to my left, all I heard was the sounds of the birds in the trees and the distant sound of a lawnmower still running. Turning to my right, I shot a glance down the dirt road to the next block. Nobody there either. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind trying to make sense of the sensation. After a moment, though, I simply shook my head and shrugged my shoulders. I guess it was nothing. Nothing more than a chill, and you, for whatever reason, getting a little paranoid. Sighing, I slid the headphones back on my head and hit play. And Diana's voice almost instantly soothing me as she shifted into, "I feel so, shaking off the last tendrils of discomfort. I turned away and resumed my jog, heading towards Michigan Ave in the opposite end of the neighborhood. I wish to God that I had listened to my gut reaction and just gone home right there and then. Reaching the other end of the neighborhood, I quickly moved up Michigan and hung a right onto Wasson Street. This was a street that had become infamous to me for the amount of dogs that would rush to the edges of the fenced-in yards, yapping their heads off at me as I passed. However, to my surprise, none came rushing forward as I passed by the houses that I knew them to be at. I guess the owners think that the weather's too cold to keep them outside today or something. I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth though. I kept going, shooting quick looks to the left and the right each time I came to a four-way intersection to make sure that no speeding cars caught me by surprise. Some idiots in the neighborhood tended to blast through at twice the posted speed limit more than a little often. Again though, I was pleasantly surprised to not see a single car driving on the roads. This may be a better jogging session than I thought it would be. I decided that I would end the session by jogging down to the main road once I was done and head down to the boat ramp. Whenever I was in a good mood, I liked to walk through it, stopping to drink in the salt air and quickly shoot a look over at the Cam, a beautiful yet sadly rusted and abandoned ship moored next to it. I reached the crest of the hill and began heading down, approaching the cross with Pacific Ave. I slowed, always stopping before crossing the second main street that made its way through our neighborhood in the next suburb. Reaching it, I shot a look to the left and right for cars. Seeing none coming, I began to step down from the sidewalk and cross the street. But as I looked up and ahead, I froze, almost in mid-step. Someone was standing across the street. They were on the opposite side of the street to me, not standing on the sidewalk but slightly back on the front lawn of a house. Normally, this wouldn't have caused me to pause. I saw people out and about every single time that I went for a run. What caused me to stop though was just how weird the person seemed. For one, they were staring straight ahead at the other side of the street, still as a statue. They never turned their head to the left or right, looking across to the yard across from them. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, due to the fact that they wore a giant hooded sweatshirt or a jacket of some kind. The hood completely obscured their face and blocked it from my view. For another few moments I watched the figure, waiting to see if they would move, but they remained perfectly still. Okay, even I have to admit that's a little weird. I shot a glance to the left, debating whether I should swing straight up to Kemen Street to avoid them. But then I shook my head. Now you are being paranoid, man. You've dealt with junkies and robbers before. One person in a hood isn't even close to as bad. My decision made, I shot another glance around and then jogged across the street, eschewing the sidewalk to stay on the road. As I approached the figure, I began mentally chiding myself for being such a baby. I decided to be polite that I would nod and wave to the person as I passed them. Who knows, maybe it'll brighten their day. The figure continued to stare straight ahead as I approached, and as we drew level with one another, I did indeed nod quickly, giving a half smile and raising the hand not holding my iPod into a wave as I shot past. For a moment, I thought the figure wouldn't acknowledge my greeting and began to turn away. But then I saw them raise a hand of their own to return the gesture, and the hood gave an almost imperceptible nod as well. For a brief moment, I saw the lower half of their face, catching a glimpse of a pleasant smile as well. And then I was past them, heading down the slightly steep hill towards Fulton. I turned my head to look straight ahead again, mounting the far left sidewalk and maneuvering myself around a Ford Taurus, which stuck out of a driveway. I again lost myself in the music and workout, making my way to the end of the street. As I reached the intersection, I chose to spare a look back the way that I had come, and I felt a shiver rocket up my spine. The figure had turned to look down the road after me, at me. Instantly, I turned away, feeling quite uncomfortable by the sight. Another shiver shot through me, letting me know that he was still watching me, and I hurried to head up the street to the final block of my exercise. But I couldn't seem to shake the feeling loose from me. As I jogged past a wooden fence, I attempted to force the image from my mind. Not jogging on that stretch of road for a while, that's just a little too freaking weird for me. Shooting a look down, I saw the sidewalk begin to curve, indicating that I had reached the street. I looked up, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't standing on the corner of Fulton and Kemen. I wasn't even near it. I looked up to see the rectangular green sign proclaim that I was at the corner of South Wall Street. Confusion washed over me like a sneaker wave. Oh, what the? I shot a look behind me. Below me, I saw the street sign for Maple Street, along with the edge of Lighthouse Market at the end. Sparing a glance the other way, I saw the 2 blocks above me, stretching up to the yellow dead-end sign. I shook my head, struggling to understand. I don't understand. Did I just imagine all of that? Did I get that lost in the music and my own thoughts? It was possible. I am a writer, and oftentimes I use the jogs as time to plan out stories in my head to write when I get home. And unfortunately, I tend to have an overactive imagination for someone my age, with a tendency to get lost in daydreams. That's the only thing that it could be, the only logical one anyways. I took a deep breath, trying to silence the tiny voice in the back of my head, one that incessantly chided at me that I didn't have that much of an imagination. Forcing it away, I did the only thing that I could think to do. I turned and began jogging again, heading up Wall Street. The surge of energy that coursed into my veins gave credence to the idea that I had simply imagined at the last few minutes, and I forced myself to concentrate on the road ahead, only allowing myself a single thought about it. That might make a good premise for a story. Gotta keep that one in mind for when I get home. And then I increased my pace, allowing the music to wash everything else away. I reached Michigan and, like I had imagined, turned right onto Wasan. As I continued, I noted that no dogs came to bark at me from the yards and driveways, just like before. I pushed the thought away. I hadn't come through before, I only daydreamed that I did. Forcing the thought away, I continued, passing by houses and parked cars as I approached the intersection with Pacific Avenue. As much as I chided myself, however, I refused to look up until I had reached the road's edge. And then I looked across and began laughing at what I saw. There was a shape there, exactly in the spot where I had imagined I had seen the figure. But it wasn't a hooded person at all. It was a small tree or bush, one which had been trimmed and shaped into an odd shape. One that if you weren't paying close enough attention, it could easily be mistaken for a person in the right light. Instantly, I realized the shape must have stuck in my mind from the last time that I had gone out. A shrubbery. You got creeped out by freaking shrubbery. I let out another laugh and quickly shot a glance around before crossing the street, approaching the bush. I hit pause on my music and slipped my headphones off, the sound of my chuckles filling my ears as I shook my head. I spoke aloud. Harry James Lake, you, my friend, are indeed one heck of a baby. You're supposed to scare your readers, not yourself, and especially not over shrubbery. Chuckling again, I began to slip the headphones back on, but I stopped as I realized something. The sound of the lawnmower, the music, the barking dog, all of it had stopped. The neighborhood was completely and totally silent. It wasn't a new experience. There had been times before when things felt completely still out here. It didn't stop it from being creepy as heck when it did, though, because it feels like you're the only person alive around here when it does. Shivering slightly at the eeriness of it all, I turned and looked at the bush, and I couldn't help but shiver again as the image of the hooded figure smiling and waving back at me wormed forward in my mind. Jamming the headphones back over my ears, I hit play, and Diana's singing again filling my ears. This time, however, her voice didn't bring me the warm and relaxed feeling it usually did, only a thin veneer of it. Turning away, I quickly jogged away from the spot, trying to ignore the chills that shot up my spine and refusing to look behind me, as much as my instincts screamed at me to. I reached the end of the block and turned left, making sure to keep my eyes up and focused on the street sign ahead. I drew alongside the tall wooden fence of someone's yard, increasing my pace and feeling more confident that I would reach it. And that's when something slammed into the fence from the other side, hard enough for it to buckle. "What the heck?" I shouted aloud, leaping off the sidewalk and half into the street as I tore my headphones off. Instantly, my ears were filled by the sounds of what had to be one heck of an aggressive dog barking on the other side. It again struck the fence, the sounds of it scratching fiercely at the wood rising with its guttural cries. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. My heart raced in my chest, and I bent over slightly, putting my hands on my legs as I let out a nervous and choked laugh. "Jeez, I'm frickin' Crow, man." I lifted one hand and rubbed my face, sliding under my sunglasses to rub at my eyes. People need to train their dogs better. That almost gave me a heart attack. I let out another nervous laugh and then forced in a few more deep breaths. My heart began to slow and I felt my breathing return to normal. The slow, dull ache of my well-worked muscles began to sing in my body as I stood still. The dog had thankfully stopped attempting to ram through the fence at me. The barking had stopped, it likely realizing that I hadn't posed any threat. I slipped my headphones back on my head and then stood up straight, my eyes lifting to look ahead of me, and I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I wasn't beside the wooden fence anymore. I was back down the intersection with Wall Street. Shock filled me. I knew that I hadn't daydreamed it this time. I had jogged around the two streets, and I knew that I had been about to reach Kevin when the dog had startled me. So high was I suddenly 2 blocks in the opposite direction. The biggest chill yet flooded through me and I took a step backwards looking around. Just as it had been my entire jog, I saw nobody outside, and since I hadn't turned on my music again, I could hear that it was still dead silent in the neighborhood. Emphasis on the dead part. As I stood there, a familiar yet more unwelcome shiver shot up my spine again. The same one that I had had when I felt I was being watched. Even though I couldn't see anyone, the feeling remained, and I didn't like it one bit. I turned and looked down the road. The bright, white roof and large sign of the market looked like, ironically considering its name, a lighthouse beacon in the situation that I had now found myself in. I made my decision in a microsecond, speaking aloud. "Yep, we're going this way now." And with that, I began jogging quickly down the road, the hill increasing my speed as I went along. I kept my eyes trained on the roof as it began to grow in size, and a renewed sense of hope began to fill me. I'm gonna make it to the store. Yes. I pumped my legs faster, ignoring the burning protest that came from them. And that was when the sun, I honestly don't know. The only way I can describe it is that it was like one of those spinning dimmer light switches in a person's house, able to crank up the brightness at will. One moment I was speeding towards the market, the sun only mildly blinding me as I burst out from beneath the trees. The next, it suddenly intensified, so bright that even with the sunglasses on, I had to squeeze my eyes shut. I continued to run though, refusing to stop. A moment later, the sun seemed to return to normal and I opened my eyes, blinking a few times to rid my vision of the black and blue spots that had taken residence in them. I was running past Wassen towards South Wall. I skidded to a stop, almost slipping on some loose gravel and falling as a mixture of shock and disbelief slammed into me like a Peterbilt. For a moment I stared blinking, and then I spoke, my voice rising into a shout. What the actual hell? Nobody answered me, the sound of my voice almost seeming to shatter the silence like a baseball through a plate glass window. Yet another chill shot up my spine, and I cast an increasingly paranoid look around, seeing as always exactly nobody. What is going on? I swallowed hard, casting a look back down at the market below. Part of me wanted to try running for it again. I almost did, but somehow I knew if I did, something would bring me right back here, like I'm stuck in some kind of loop. The thought made a sudden burst of fear shoot through me. I looked around, my brain screaming at me to come up with some kind of plan. Only one came to mind. I began running to the nearest house. Reaching it, I slammed my hands against the front door in the loudest, most frantic knocking that I had ever done. Hello, please, if anybody's in there, I need help. I waited for a moment, but nobody came to the door. I quickly moved to the house next door, again banging and calling for help. But like before, nobody answered. And with blind panic beginning to rear its ugly head, threatening to consume me, I began to race from house to house, from apartment building to apartment building, banging on every door and screaming my lungs out. Some of them had lights on in their windows, while the others were dark. But the outcome was always the same. Nobody came to the door, and my screams seemed to echo off the buildings and cars, drifting and dying away. I felt my sanity trapeze precariously towards a knife's edge as I reached the corner of Wall in Michigan, my throat beginning to sting from screaming so much. I cast a look to the left, my eyes widening as I saw the side of my own apartment building just a single block down. Home. Without even thinking, I began sprinting for it, a mixture of fear and hope filling every fiber of my being as it drew nearer. More hope surged as I reached the corner, where my foot caught a raised slab of pavement. I fell butt over tea kettle, the concrete tearing at my hands and wrists. For a few moments I simply lay there. Breathing heavily and terrified of what I would see when I looked up. Finally, I forced myself to lift my head, and I felt tears begin to seep from my eyes and utter hopelessness fill me, because I was back at the corner of Michigan and Wall. I think a small bit of my sanity cracked then and there, because the next span of time, which I'm honestly not sure how long it was, is nothing but a blur. A blur of running down the same two streets that I somehow found myself trapped in, like I was a rat in an endless maze. I can vaguely remember the sounds of my own screams and shouts echoing in the silence, remember slamming my hands against doors, sometimes even the same repeatedly. And I can vaguely remember that no matter what I did, I always ended up back at the corner again, no matter where I tried to run. But there is one thing that I can recall with crystal clarity, and that was the seemingly unending feeling of being watched, of being observed, and not by anything you would remotely call benevolent. I'm not sure when I snapped back to reality. Time seemed to matter little in the loop that I found myself in. The sun refused to move at all from its position high in the sky, even though it must have been hours past. But suddenly I became cognizant of myself again, myself and my surroundings. The first thing I realized was that I was back at the cross street of Wasson and Pacific. I looked down at my hands, one which somehow still clutched my iPod in an almost death grip. My knuckles were red and raw from how much I must have been banging against the doors, and my throat felt as if somebody had jammed a red-hot poker down it. My cheeks were wet from crying, and my lungs felt as if they were on fire. The second thing I realized was what stood across the street from me on someone's front lawn. It was the figure. Not the bush shaped like a figure. The figure. It still stood as still as a statue, just like the first time that I had seen it, which I now knew hadn't been a daydream. The hood still covered its head, and it stared straight ahead at the opposite side of the street. A surge of fear welled up in me as I realized I couldn't see the bush anymore. My mind raced. How long has it stood there? How many times did I pass by it without realizing? How long has it been watching me? And what does it want? The final thought sent a new emotion through me, likely the only one that I could still feel besides fear and blind panic. Anger. Red-hot anger. Rage being the better descriptor. It began to boil inside of me as the dots connected. It had to be the reason that I was here. It was the reason that I was trapped in this loop. All because what? I had decided to be polite and smile and wave at it. The thought made the rage burn hotter, and even though part of me screamed not to, I began to march across the street towards it. My mouth opened and I began to yell at it, to scream actually. Why? Why are you doing this? What do you want? I stopped about 15 feet from it, breathing heavily and feeling like I wanted to commit murder. I waited for an answer, waited for it to acknowledge my screams. But it simply continued to stare straight ahead as if it hadn't even heard me. I was about to take another step forward when an almost deafeningly loud sound assaulted my ears. For a moment I couldn't understand what it was, my mind unable to process it. And then I realized that I still had my headphones on my head. My iPod had begun to play and I quickly lifted the hand holding the device, unclasping my fingers and reaching out to stab at the off button. But I froze, both at the title and the artwork displayed on the screen, as well as the vocals that began filling my ears. Don't Fear the Reaper, and by Blue Oyster Cult. I froze. Whatever rage that I had had seemed to die away instantly, replaced by the biggest, coldest shiver that I had ever felt, shoot up my spine and causing me to gasp out loud. The singing continued. Buck Dharma's voice yelling at me to not fear the Reaper as the first chorus began. That was when the first tendrils of horror, beyond even the insanity tearing them out that I had already felt, began to seep into me. I hadn't hit play, and I had been listening to Diana Dors and not Blue Oyster Cult. It was as if the song had been selected on its own, almost as if it were some kind of a message. My eyes suddenly went wide, and feeling as though my heart were about to stop, I slowly lifted my head to look at the figure less than 20 feet in front of me, which had turned in my direction as I had been preoccupied. The head was still bowed too low for me to see anything but its lower face, and then it slowly raised one hand to wave at me. The fingers twittered like a person would do waving at a pet or a wild animal, ever so playfully. That movement alone sent a bolt of renewed terror through me, but it wasn't what made me scream, every part of me filling with horror. It wasn't what made me turn and begin sprinting away, dropping the iPod to the ground. the headphones tearing themselves off my head, and the blaring music replaced with the shrill sound of my own screams as I felt my mind fracture into 1,000 pieces. It smiled at me. It grinned. I can't remember much after that, only vague snippets at most, and those I can't help but shudder at. Those I wish I could forget, because I remember shooting looks behind me to see that thing chasing after me, the hood still covering its head as it continued to grin at me. A grin with a mouth far too wide for its face, and filled with teeth that more closely resembled a shark or an alligator than a human's, chasing after me but never touching the ground as it did. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, straps holding my arms and legs tight to the bed like I was a mental patient in an asylum. When I began calling out, a nurse, a doctor, and to my surprise, an armed guard rushed into my room. For a few moments, they stared at me as if I were about to attempt to attack them. But once they realized that I had returned to the land of the sane, they immediately began bombarding me with questions about what had happened to me, whether I took any kind of drugs or drank profusely, whether I had a history of mental illness. I wanted so badly to tell them the truth, but I knew the only thing that it would do for me was buy me a one-way ticket to the funny farm permanently. And so I lied. I told them that I had been attacked on my run by a man who had attempted to kidnap me. In my mind, I thought it would explain my delirium to them. People who are kidnapped and manage to escape often do so with their mental state in a fragile state, if not completely broken. For a few moments, I thought they would see right through my charade and call me out, but somehow they bought it. They brought the police in, asking me to give an account and a description of my attacker. On that, I didn't really lie, not much anyways. I told them that they had hid their face under a hood of some kind, and giving a vague description of some kind of well-built white man in his 40s. The kind that could easily overpower a slightly overweight 20-something-year-old guy. And again, they bought it. After showing me the sketch that they had made, one of the officers patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry, son," he said to me with a smile. "If he's still around here, we'll find him." And then he handed me something in a plastic evidence bag. "I believe this belongs to you. We found it a few blocks away from where we found you. You must have dropped it in the struggle." I couldn't say anything, only nod as I stared at my iPod, now scuffed with several scratch marks from its fall, and from something else, something which had made a single deep gouge in the metal back of the device. I knew they would never find any trace, because what in a way did kidnap me wasn't human. Not even remotely human outside of vague appearances. I don't know how I managed to get away, how I managed to survive. I wondered if that thing was simply toying with me, the same way that a cat might toy with a bird when it's not hungry, or if I actually managed to break free. Either way though, I'm thankful that I'm still alive. Like I said at the start, after I had returned home and I guess for the sake of my own sanity, I began to endlessly tell myself that what I had seen, what I had experienced hadn't been real, that I had in effect suffered a simple mental break, either from stress or actually being attacked by another person that day, that none of it had actually happened. When my own words didn't help, I had replaced them with alcohol, and slowly and surely as the months went on, it did in fact begin to feel as though it had been nothing more than a waking nightmare. I slowly began to return to a normal life. I even went back to jogging, though I changed my route, choosing to jog through the next neighborhood over instead. Nothing ever happened to me and I never felt like I was being watched again. Not by anything that wasn't human anyways. Until, like I said, yesterday, which is the reason I decided to write this and to share it with you. You see, I got a phone call from Mark, a friend of mine who recently moved into one of the emptied houses at the end of Wasson Street, where it links up with Fulton. He called asking me to help bring some stuff of his that he couldn't fit in his little hatchback over from his folks' place. For a moment, I felt a small pang of hesitation as a flicker of memory surfaced, and then I pushed it away and said that I would absolutely help him. We met at my apartment, and together we climbed into my International Scout, driving over to his parents and loading the flat-screen TV, mattress, and other large boxes into the back. And then we drove back across town and into the neighborhood. I turned down Wasson from Michigan, driving down streets that I hadn't been on in a year. I forced myself to appear calm as Mark knew nothing about what had happened to me. When we reached the intersection with Pacific, I felt a small shiver shoot up my spine, and for a moment I couldn't bring myself to look over across the street, and then I forced myself to. The bush sat there, looking slightly eerie but nevertheless very inanimate in the fading light. I reached down and flicked on my headlights, banishing away the gloom and showing poignantly that it was, in fact, nothing but shrubbery. And get a hold of yourself, man. None of that even happened anyways. Realizing that Mark was staring at me, I eased onto the accelerator and drove across the intersection. I spared a last look at the bush as we passed. It still looked normal. I let out a snort, shaking my head. Told ya. As we began to draw near his house and slow down, I suddenly saw him turn around in his seat and look out the back glass. "What is it, bro?" I asked him. For a moment, he simply continued to look and then turned back to me. "You know anybody on this street besides me, man?" A small wave of confusion washed over me, and I shook my head as I parked in front of his place. "No, not that I'm aware of anyways. Why?" He turned and pointed back through the back glass. "Well, apparently somebody does. Look." That was when an almost forgotten but horrifyingly familiar chill shot up my spine. I felt the blood drain from my face and my heart begin to pound in my chest as I twisted around in my seat to look behind us. There, back up the hill near the intersection stood a figure bathed in the yellow glow of the streetlight which had snapped on overhead, one whose upper face was obscured by a hood pulled down low over its head. I felt myself begin to violently shake as the figure raised one arm to wave at us, twiddling the fingers like a human would at an animal. A flash of white caught the streetlight's glow, coming from the exposed lower half of its face, as it grinned. Nelson Asada, Die Screaming, Meat Cashier, Talamagara, Deggy, Leon Knott, Jimmy Griffin, Miss Eldridge, Sleepy Shroomy, Takio Zarilla, Richard French, Mina Lynn Kidder, Mark Norman, Andrew Harrington, Swaggity Swoot, Omni Rubik, Sonic GMD, Lunas TV, Rolly, Wayward Son, Caleb Windsor, Never Enough, Russell and Flo, Stevie B 7649, Ray Weingartner, Stephen King 04,